Chapter 68. In the dense forest, a figure was flying. She didn't stop until she couldn't sense the breaths of other cultivators behind her. What bad luck. Chinga covered her chest with her hand. She felt the aura inside her body surging and felt very regretful. It was all because she was too careless. She thought she was very safe after laying a formation in her hiding place. As a result, the spiritual aura fluctuation of the formation was discovered by a group of people from Wuxia sect, who planned to surround her. She was able to escape this time thanks to the several escape talismans she had and the formation that helped her resist for a while. Otherwise, if she had to face 5 or 6 people who were coming at her aggressively, she probably wouldn't even have ashes left. Her aura was a bit unstable for a while after she used the escape talisman forcefully in the encirclement. She swallowed an aura-nourishing pill and looked up at the starry sky. It seemed to be the hour of the yin now. There were still more than 2 hours left before the exit formation would open. With the fierce melee, there were fewer and fewer people alive and more fighting scenes. Along the way, all she encountered were corpses, not people. Thinking of this, Chenga shook her head and smiled bitterly. She didn't care about what happened to other people. It was good enough that she could save her own life. At this moment, she felt the aura inside her dantian was still unstable. She hesitated for a moment and finally found a tree with luxuriant branches and leaves. She jumped on it and restrained her aura completely. She didn't lay a formation, nor did she use her divine sense. She just quietly adjusted her aura. Although she wasn't seriously injured, if she didn't adjust her aura, it would be very disadvantageous for her if she encountered an enemy again. She didn't want to use the escape talisman again to escape, lest a minor injury turned into a serious one. As time passed, no one came to this place. It seemed that there were indeed not many cultivators alive in the forest. Chenga sighed inwardly. After experiencing several life and death battles, she felt more and more indifferent. Even death couldn't easily move her. Perhaps, after seeing it many times, she felt it wasn't a big deal. There were so many deaths on the path of cultivation. If she didn't get used to it, how could she go further on the road to immortality? She was glad that she could adapt so quickly. Her aura gradually stabilized and she breathed a sigh of relief. There seemed to be a demonic beast nearby. She could vaguely hear its roar, but obviously no one wanted to catch it now. The more people died, the more likely it was for the survivors to obtain the foundation-building pills. Moreover, killing others and directly obtaining the spoils of war was much faster than slowly killing them one by one. Even she herself had obtained many demonic beasts that were killed by others. The 2 cultivators she killed in the poisonous spring, the husband and wife who besieged her, and the group of people who perished together with her, in addition to the 20 to 30 demonic monkey corpses on her body, she basically didn't need to take out all of the demonic beast corpses to obtain a foundation-building pill. Therefore, she didn't want to cause any trouble. Just because she was used to death did not mean that she would kill. As long as others did not offend her, she would not make a move. Thinking of this, she smiled bitterly. Sure enough, he had become a cold and heartless person. All of a sudden, the sound of light footsteps entered her ears. Chenga opened her eyes. She didn't use her divine sense, so she didn't notice him until he came close. Then, through the branches and leaves, he vaguely saw several pairs of feet. It seemed like there were 3 people, 2 men and a woman. The woman's footsteps were staggering, which was very strange. She tilted her head but didn't move. She continued to hide. In a situation where she couldn't even protect herself, it was better not to meddle in other people's business. The voices of these people came from below. "Big brother, why did you walk for so long?" This voice was very young and sounded very impatient. Another voice, which was slightly lower, answered, "How would I know?" "Hey stinky girl, you're not lying to us, are you?" Cough cough. The woman's coughs rang out. Chenga couldn't help but frown. This voice. "Senior Marshal Brothers, why are you so anxious? Can't you sense the demonic beast's spiritual aura? That demonic beast is guarding that vermilion heart fruit tree." It was Yan's voice. This answer seemed to have been muddled. The younger one said, "What you said seems to be reasonable." As the footsteps gradually faded away, Chenga muttered to herself for a moment, then quietly slipped down from the tree and quietly followed them. The cultivation levels of these 2 male cultivators couldn't be considered high. One was in the 8th layer of the aura refining realm, while the other was in the 9th layer. They actually survived until now and were even together with Yen. Moreover, based on their conversation, it seemed they wanted Yen to take them to find some vermilion heart fruit. She had never heard of this kind of spiritual fruit. Could it be some kind of mystical fruit? Chenga shook her head and denied this idea. If it really was some kind of mystical fruit, Murong Yen should have gone to pick it a long time ago. Why would she wait until now? She must have been caught by these two men and used those words to deceive them. Mo Chinga quietly approached them and carefully observed the situation. Sure enough, Murong Yan's hands were tied and her body was injured. The two male cultivators were Wuxia sect cultivators. One was in his 20s while the other was in his 20s. They soon found the demonic beast's location. Soon after, she saw the two men fly into a rage and pull out their spirit tools. "Stinky girl, you actually dared to deceive us brothers." However, Murong Yen was also very quick-witted. She desperately dodged to the side and cleverly startled the demonic beast. She then hid behind the two men and the demonic beast pounced on them. This demonic beast was a first-rank giant ape. Although its cultivation level wasn't obvious, its skin was thick and its flesh was extremely strong. For a moment, the two men's hands and feet were tied down by it. Seeing this, Murong Yen quietly retreated. Taking advantage of the fact that the two men weren't paying attention, she hastily ran backwards. "Big brother, this whore wants to run." The younger one fiercely stared at Murong Yan's back. The older one used his spirit tool to block the giant ape's attack and shouted, "Chase after her. She actually deceived us. We can't let her run away." "Alright." The younger one withdrew his spirit tool and chased after the giant ape. After barely blocking the giant ape's attack once again, the man muttered, "This won't do. She's too strong. It seems I have to use a treasure." With that thought in mind, he took out a pigeon egg-sized purple ball from his robe and threw it at the giant ape. With a loud boom, the giant ape was instantly blasted into a bloody mess. The rocks and trees in the vicinity were all blown away, raising the area within a radius of 30 meters to the ground. The man felt a bit of heartache as he watched the bloody mess. There wasn't a single piece of flesh left on the ground. It was unclear whether he was feeling heartache for the corpse that couldn't be pieced back together or the treasure he used. After feeling heartache for a while, he clenched his teeth and turned around to chase after his younger brother. However, he only ran a few steps when he heard his younger brother's miserable scream. Startled, he hurriedly ran forward. Third brother. Third brother. Before long, he found his younger brother lying on the ground and there was no one around him. Mo Chinga pulled Murong Yen and ran madly. She only stopped when she could no longer sense that person's breath. Murong Yen looked at her gratefully. "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, thank you. Fortunately I met you. Otherwise Mo Chinga shook her head and said with a smile, "Senior Marshal Sister Murong, you don't have to be so polite. It was nothing." She paused for a moment then asked curiously, "Senior Marshal Sister, what happened?" Mo Chinga's question made Murong Yen smile bitterly. She shook her head and said, "It's all because I didn't like cultivating before. This time I really suffered a lot. I ran into Wuxia sect's disciples several times, but every time I narrowly escaped. Later I ran into them. They wanted to kill me but I lied to them that there was a strange plant here. Sure enough it was like that." Mo Chinga nodded. "What was that thing in that person's hand? How could it be so powerful?" "About that, I'm also not very clear. Spirit tools don't seem like spirit tools and magic weapons don't seem like magic weapons. It seems to be a kind of special object refined from the soul of demonic beasts and a lightning spell. Once it's thrown with spiritual aura, it will explode. Its power is extremely powerful. From what I've seen, no one can withstand it." This was Mo Chinga's first time seeing this thing. Its power was indeed enormous. Perhaps no aura-refining cultivator could withstand it, so she chose to run. After all, she didn't want to lose her life. When she saw Murong Yen, Mo Chinga couldn't help but think of Murong Zi. She hesitated for a moment, but in the end she still decided to think about it after they got out. Danger was everywhere now. If she suddenly found out that her elder brother had died, she was afraid her emotions would fluctuate and affect the fight of magical powers. Mo Chinga asked, "Senior Marshal Sister Murong, what do you plan to do next?" Upon hearing Mo Chinga's question, Murong Yen showed a bitter smile. "I won't hide it from Junior Marshal Brother Yi. Before I came here, I was full of ambition and was determined to fight for a foundation-building pill. Only now do I realize that I didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. I don't have any regrets now. I just hope to get out of here safely. In the future, I'll cultivate diligently before thinking about other things." Mo Chinga nodded inwardly upon hearing what Murong Yen said. It seemed Murong Yen really understood. This was good. Murong Zi's painstaking efforts weren't wasted. "Junior Marshal Brother Yi?" Murong Yen hesitated for a while but in the end, she still shook her head. "Forget it. We'll talk about it if I can get out of here alive. I'll take my leave first." Mo Chinga was stunned. Senior Marshal Sister Murong, you're not coming with me? Murong Yen suddenly turned her head. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you don't mind coming with me? Emo Chenga was dumbfounded for a moment before she finally reacted. Could it be that Murong Yen thinks I won't be willing to go with her? Emo Chenga immediately smiled and said, what do you think, Senior Marshal Sister? Upon seeing Emo Chenga's expression, Murong Yen smiled embarrassedly. I was thinking too much. The two of them smiled at each other. The estrangement caused by the changes in the school during this period of time instantly disappeared. Murong Yan's expression was no longer stiff. Instead, she looked a little more relaxed. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, I really underestimated you in the past. I never expected that your spells would actually be this powerful. I was indeed too lazy before. Emo Chenga teased her. Senior Marshal Sister, it's good that you know you're lazy. I know my innate talent isn't good, so I have no choice but to work hard. She looked at the starry sky again. It was already the hour of the morning. There's still 2 hours left. Senior Marshal Sister, we can get closer to the center. A hesitant expression appeared on Murong Yan's face. Are we going now? There should be a lot of people going to the center. Shouldn't we avoid them? Emo Chenga said, rest assured. We're close to the opening of the exit. Everyone wants to leave, so they definitely don't want to cause trouble. It'll actually be a bit safer than before. What Emo Chenga said was reasonable, so Murong Yen finally decided to believe her. She said straightforwardly, then I'll let Junior Marshal Brother Yi decide. I'll go with you. Emo Chenga nodded. Senior Marshal Sister, how are your injuries? Are you okay with hurrying along? Murong Yen said, they're fine. They're just minor injuries. Since Murong Yen was sure, Emo Chenga didn't hesitate. Then let's go. The two of them used the light body technique and hurried towards the center. The closer they got to the center, the more people there were. Murong Yen felt very uneasy. She asked in a low voice, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, are you really okay? Emo Chenga pulled her hand and gave her a smile. I'm fine. Trust me. Murong Yan's face suddenly turned red. In the end, she nodded. Emo Chenga, however, didn't notice. She was still holding Murong Yan's hand and rushing towards the exit. Chapter 69. There was a huge open space in the center of the forest. Many cultivators from the 3 groups had gathered around the open space. They were all staring at each other with vigilance. Emo Chenga arrived with Murong Yen. Everyone's gaze fell on them, but no one dared to make a move because they were afraid of breaking the balance. Although there were many Wuxia sect disciples present, everyone cherished their lives. The disciples of Yunwu sect and Jindao school also didn't dare to make a move when they were obviously at a disadvantage. Otherwise, it would be too much of a loss if they lost their lives before killing their enemies. Without caring about these people's gazes, Emo Chenga found a corner close to her fellow disciples and pulled Murong Yen over. Seeing that the two of them were motionless, these people moved their gazes away from them and stared at the newcomers. Emo Chenga cautiously scanned the surroundings. Sure enough, Wuxia sect's main branch suffered heavy losses. There were less than 100 people present. Including those who hadn't arrived yet, there were probably no more than 200. There were about 60 to 70 people from Yunwu sect and Jindao school. All of them were covered in blood and had fierce gazes. Among the people she knew, only Jiang Shanghong was present. Obviously, he had also experienced a bitter battle. Now he found a place to meditate. As for the others, Qin Shi, Lui Dao and Su Jingji, none of them were present. Emo Chenga frowned slightly. She was a bit worried. Based on the number of people present, perhaps more than half of the cultivators died this time. She really couldn't be sure that those 3 people were still alive. At that moment, Murong Yen gently pulled her sleeve and whispered, Junior Marshal Brother Yi. Seeing her pale face, Emo Chenga showed a comforting smile. Don't worry. In this place, Murong Yen knew that her methods and insight were inferior to Emo Chenga's, so she obediently listened to her. Emo Chenga looked up at the sky. The sky was already turning white. It was almost dawn. Once dawn arrived, the exit formation would appear here and they would be able to leave. Emo Chenga picked up a clean patch of grass and pulled Murong Yen to sit down. She seemed to be meditating and adjusting her breath like everyone else, but in fact she was secretly observing the surroundings. She believed that many people present were as vigilant as she was. At the last moment, no one wanted to throw their lives away. Another group of Wuxia sect cultivators arrived. Emo Chenga swept her gaze over them and frowned. She found that the old man who ran away from the poisonous spring was among them. However, she did not intend to take any action. Firstly, even though they had fought once, there was no enmity between them. Secondly, once she made a move, the balance would be broken. She still wanted to return alive. The old man also noticed her, and a look of surprise flashed across his face. Then, like her, he pretended not to see her. Presumably, many of the people present did the same. Revenge could be taken in the future, but it was not worth it to pay with their lives. More and more people came. When it was almost dawn, a few cultivators would come out of the forest from time to time and find their own camps. There were also enemies who appeared together, but they glared at each other angrily and did not make a move. Just when everyone was anticipating the opening of the formation, a loud shout suddenly rang out, "Damned girl, I finally found you. Return my brother's life." Soon after, a figure pounced towards Murong Yen. Emo Chinga wrinkled her brows. She pulled Murong Yen up with one hand and used her greenwood sword with the other to block the opponent's attack. When he took a closer look, he discovered that it was the elder brother of the pair of brothers who had just captured Murong Yen. Oh no. Emo Chinga turned around to look. Sure enough, the atmosphere in the field changed. Everyone's gazes fell on them. Many people had already secretly taken out their spirit tools. She was extremely furious. This blockhead. Just now, when she heard the conversation between the two brothers, she already thought they were stupid. It seemed there was something wrong with their brains. She immediately took out an earth-splitting talisman with her other hand and threw it at him. Although this blockhead was slow, his reaction wasn't slow. He somersaulted and dodged her attack. Their actions ignited the atmosphere in an instant. Several Yunwu sect disciples wanted to help, so Zixia sect's side immediately took action. As a result, the two sides had already started fighting before they could arrive. Emo Chinga had no time to deal with the chaos. She looked up and saw that the blockhead had taken out a pigeon egg-sized purple ball and was about to throw it at her. She was instantly shocked. Murong Yan's complexion was even paler. They had seen the power of this thing with their own eyes. Once it was thrown, they definitely wouldn't be able to resist it. Seeing that the other party was about to throw the purple ball, Emo Chinga hurriedly took out a high-grade defensive talisman and slapped it on the talisman. A defensive barrier immediately appeared and covered the two of them. Boom! A deafening sound rang out, followed by the screams of other cultivators. Emo Chinga moved her spiritual aura, preparing to resist it. But in the next moment, the incoming force was easily blocked by her. She opened her eyes and was dumbfounded. She gnashed his teeth and shouted, "Why are you in a daze? Come and help." He raised the sword, poured his spiritual aura on it and stood in front of them. Emo Chinga felt as if she had just woken up from a dream. She hastily moved her spiritual aura to share part of the impact. After a while, the spiritual aura pressure finally subsided. Seeing that they actually blocked it, the blockhead shouted angrily and wanted to rush towards them again. Since she almost lost her life, how could Emo Chinga be polite to him? She immediately used an ice-condensing talisman. Murong Yen also didn't stay idle. She also rushed forward with her spirit tool. She released a raging flame art. Although the blockhead's abilities weren't low, he couldn't withstand the three people's joint attack. In order to dodge the ice-condensing talisman, he was hit by Shi's spell. His movements were a step too slow, so he was immediately hit by Murong Yan's spirit tool. He staggered and fell to the ground. Seeing that he was completely dead, the three of them heaved sighs of relief. The power of this purple ball was indeed extraordinary. Aside from them, the people around them were also caught in the crossfire. Some people were even badly mutilated by the explosion. Only a few people managed to block the impact. The dead and injured were all disciples of Yunwu sect and Jindao school. Although the instigator was already dead, each and every one of them was furious. They raised their spirit tools and rushed towards the Zixia sect disciples. Zixia sect disciples also had the advantage in numbers, so how could they be willing to show weakness? They also rushed forward. Spells and spirit tools were flying everywhere in the sky. Junior Marshal Brother Yi. She waved at them after dealing with a sneak attack. Emo Chinga was on guard as she pulled Murong Yen closer to him. Senior Marshal Brother Qin, thank you. Don't thank me so quickly. He took out a bunch of talismans as if they were free and gave them to the two of them. Hold on for a while. The exit will open in about a quarter of an hour. Emo Chinga also knew that this wasn't the time to be polite. She took the talismans he handed her, then turned around and threw a raging flame talisman at the Zixia sect disciples who were rushing towards them. This battle royale had the largest number of participants since the start of the day and night. It was also the most intense one. Spells, talismans and spirit tools were flying everywhere. It was hard to tell whether they were on their own side or the enemy's side. They couldn't even dodge and could only use spells and talismans to resist. In the end, the three of them had no choice but to stick a defensive talisman on each of them to resist all kinds of attacks. Eventually, a white light shone in the center of the open space. This white light became brighter and brighter until it slowly formed the shape of a formation. It was overflowing with light and vibrant colors, and it was full of spiritual aura. Everyone's gazes were attracted by the formation. Even the fighting stopped. In a flash, everyone rushed towards the formation like a swarm of bees. Chenga intentionally retreated a bit, but the people behind her also rushed forward. A group of people rushed towards the formation in a chaotic manner. Soon they were squeezed into the formation. The scene in front of them changed. Chenga raised her head. With a glance, she saw the three core formation cultivators with ashen complexions. Disciples came out of the cliff one after another. Almost every one of them was covered in blood and looked miserable. Some of them were even seriously injured. Murong Yen, who was next to her, leaned towards her and whispered, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, will we?" Chenga shook her head and whispered back, "Don't worry." Although these core formation cultivators had ashen complexions, they didn't have any killing intent, so they probably wouldn't attack them. Besides, after the last battle royale, perhaps only 1/3 of the original disciples would come out alive. If they still had to be punished, they might as well recruit new disciples. Once they left the murderous environment and didn't need to be vigilant, Chenga felt exhausted all over. Her body tilted and she almost fell down. But when she turned her head, she saw Murong Yen staring at the formation with rapt attention. Chenga's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly remembered she hadn't told him about Murong Zi. "Senior Marshal Sister Murong?" Murong Yen answered softly but didn't look at her. She was still staring at the formation. Chenga took a deep breath. She suddenly hated herself for telling such cruel news. "In fact, I met Senior Marshal Brother Murong." Upon hearing this, Murong Yen suddenly turned her head. Chenga clenched her teeth and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Murong has passed away." Murong Yen was dumbfounded. She seemed to be in disbelief, but soon, her face gradually turned pale. She suddenly grabbed Chenga's hand and said, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, can you say that again?" Chenga sighed and repeated, "I met Senior Marshal Brother Murong. He's already passed away." Murong Yan's face turned pale, but she didn't let go of her hand. Instead, she stared at Chenga and asked, "Junior Marshal Brother, do you have any proof?" This time, Chenga didn't say anything. She just handed Murong Zi's Chenkuan bag to her. Murong Yen took it with trembling hands and opened it eagerly. When she saw those familiar spirit tools, she finally looked sad and let go of her hands to cover her face. Although she wasn't responsible for Murong Zi's death, he died while they were fighting against the enemy. Chenga felt very uncomfortable seeing Murong Yen so sad. She patted her shoulder and shook his head. He seemed to be comforting her that this wasn't her responsibility. She forced a smile, but she didn't feel any better. "Senior Marshal Sister, don't be sad. Senior Marshal Brother always wanted you to build your foundation. You." At this point, she couldn't continue speaking. How could a few dry words of comfort compare to the sadness of losing a loved one? After a long time, Murong Yen finally put down her hands. There were no tears on her face. Her face was pale and her expression was gloomy. She used to be a charming and lovely girl, but after a series of blows recently, she was no longer as bright and beautiful as before. "I'm sorry, Junior Marshal Brother Yi. It's not that I don't believe you, but I understand." Chenga took out a jade box and handed it to her. "This is Senior Marshal Brother Murong's ashes. Senior Marshal Sister, don't be too sad. The dead are gone, so you should live better." Murong Yen accepted the jade box and the Chenkuan bag. A sad smile appeared on her face as she said, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, please tell me how my big brother died." Chenga said, "Senior Marshal Brother Murong and I happened to run into each other. He was attacked by someone and was seriously injured. While he was still recuperating, we ran into a second-rank iron-teethed crocodile, then we ran into 3 other people. In the end, Senior Marshal Brother Murong couldn't hold on any longer and died together with one of them." Chenga simply explained, but she was still worried and emphasized, "Senior Marshal Sister, don't think about revenge. This hatred can't be settled." How could Murong Yen not understand this? It was just that she always felt unwilling. After a long time, she reached out to wipe the remaining tears on her face and said with a determined expression, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, don't worry. I'm no longer the insensible me from before. I know what I should do." Soon after, she laughed self-mockingly and said, Although we weren't biological siblings, Big Brother always doted on me. No matter what I wanted, he always thought of a way to get it for me. Now, he thought of a way to get me foundation-building pills, but I never expected the price would be his life. Chapter 70. The development of the matter was just as Mo Chenga expected. The person who came up with this idea originally thought it would be an opportunity for the disciples of the three groups to communicate, but he didn't expect it would turn into an opportunity to kill each other. Because of this, the nascent soul grandmaster of Wuxia sect flew into a rage and almost killed the person who came up with this idea. However, it was already a long time before these aura-refining disciples learned about this. On the day they finished their test, the three core formation grandmasters were livid. After hearing the disciples' reports, they sent several foundation-building disciples to clean up the mess. These foundation-building disciples found some seriously injured aura-refining disciples and also reported the tragic situation left behind in the mountain forest. Soon after, the core formation grandmasters discussed something, but they didn't say anything. They just took them back to the sect and ordered them not to go down the mountain. After Senior Marshal Brother Zhou inquired about it, he told them not to worry and finally appeased some people. During this test, their courtyard lost a lot of people. Mo Chenga's house was considered good. Out of 5 people, 4 came out alive. The one who didn't come out was Su Jingji. Louis Dao was seriously injured, but in the end he still survived. Su Jingji, on the other hand, disappeared. No one knew who killed him or where his body and ashes were. There was no trace of him. In this disaster, many people disappeared like this, but they didn't expect Su Jingji to be one of them. After receiving confirmation, Su clan's people came to clean up his things. Thus, Su Jingji's traces completely disappeared from this house. Soon after, the sect head announced the results of this test. Just as they guessed, there was no investigation or disposal. Instead, he directly announced the distribution of foundation-building pills. In this test, no more than 100 Yunwu sect disciples came out alive, but 40 of them obtained foundation-building pills. Reportedly, because the elite disciples suffered heavy losses, the nascent soul grandmaster of Wuxia sect decided to distribute more foundation-building pills, hoping to produce more foundation-building cultivators among them to make up for this loss. The 4 people in Mo Chenga's house, including Murong Yen, were among them. However, this news didn't make Mo Chenga happy. Murong Zi's death and Su Jingji's disappearance made her feel unprecedentedly lost. She remembered Su Jingji's irritable appearance before the test that day. In fact, she had a bad premonition that day, but she didn't think too much about it. She never expected it would be an eternal farewell. Junior Marshal Brother Yi. Mo Chenga, who was leaning against a tree, raised her head and saw Qin Shi standing in front of her with a wine bottle in his hand. She forced a smile and took it. Qin Shi also sat down next to her, and the two of them drank in silence. It was an autumn afternoon. The sunlight seeped through the leaves and shone on the body, making people lazy and unwilling to move. The surroundings were quiet, and only the distant waterfall added a little liveliness. Thinking back to a month ago, there were 8 people chatting here, a group of people ordering her around. But now, Su Jingji was dead, Louis Dao was seriously injured, Wang Qinyi was married far away, Shenbing used her beauty to seduce people, Murong Yen was determined to cultivate assiduously, and Senior Marshal Brother Zhou was busy with his future. The only one who could come here and sit with her was Qin Shi. Senior Brother Qin. If you build your foundation, what will you do? Of course it's to continue cultivating. Why do you ask? Mo Chenga shook her head. She couldn't tell why she was feeling so vexed. I just don't understand. What's the purpose of cultivating in the end? What was the purpose of cultivation? 80% of the people in the cultivation world would answer this question without hesitation. To live a long life. But what was the purpose of living a long life? Fighting each other like this, causing countless deaths and injuries? For the sake of living a long life, why didn't they care about life at all? Qin Shi thought about it seriously, but he didn't answer. He just shook his head and slowly talked about something irrelevant. I was born in a noble family in the secular world. However, because I was from a branch family, I was never valued and was always bullied by others. I don't know why, but ever since I was a child, I felt that I was different from others. I didn't want to fight for favor with my brothers, and I didn't have any interest in playing. I only focused on studying. When I was 8 years old, a guest came to our manor. He was said to be our ancestor, and he seemed to be an extraordinary person. He was already several hundred years old, but he didn't look old at all. In front of him, even the most dignified clan master didn't dare to utter a word. Then I was brought to him. After he tested my spiritual roots, he told the elders that he wanted to take me away. At that time I was still young and didn't know what I was looking forward to. I just suddenly felt that maybe this was the path I wanted to walk. At this point he turned around and smiled. Sure enough, my premonition was correct. I walked on a completely different path from my brothers in the manor. I'm still young now, but those brothers and sisters of mine have already turned into dust. Why do we cultivate? I can't answer this question. For me, cultivating is a natural part of my life. I don't need to ask why. I just want to walk on this path. His quiet narration made Emo Chenga feel very calm. His experiences had also allowed her to see herself in him. Just want to walk on this path. Is that it? She pressed her forehead and said in a low voice, I don't know why I walked on this path. I was young and intelligent, so I knew how to read people's faces. I was used to the fickleness of human nature, and I always felt pain in my heart. At that time, I only hated myself for knowing these things and why I couldn't be like other children. Later, when I met second uncle, I realized I was really different from other children. Cultivation? I also don't know why, but second uncle told me that without strength there's no freedom. Without strength there's no freedom, she murmured and repeated. His gaze on her suddenly had a lot of complicated feelings. Emo Chenga threw the bottle of wine away after she finished it. In fact, she never drank because she wasn't in the mood and didn't have the chance. Second uncle didn't drink because he said that cultivators couldn't indulge in worldly things, so she also thought the same. However, this feeling of drinking wine made her feel very comfortable. Senior Marshal Brother Chin, that elder of yours should have left you by now, right? She paused but didn't say anything. In fact, second uncle's lifespan is almost up. If it's not this year, it'll be next year. Sometimes I think I can accept it calmly, but sometimes I find it hard to imagine. If second uncle is gone, what should I do? If I'm like Senior Marshal Brother Su, suddenly disappearing without even saying goodbye, what should I do? She hugged herself and buried her head in her arms, not daring to continue. She wanted to pat her shoulder, but he hesitated and his hand didn't fall. In the end he said, I'm different from you. In fact, my aptitude isn't the best, but I've never encountered a bottleneck in my cultivation. Great-grandfather said that maybe I was born to cultivate, so I don't have any obsessions or ties. In other words, I don't have superfluous feelings. I can't understand how you feel, but I know you have a heavy attachment to your feelings. If you can't let go, you won't have any achievements in the future. Emo Chenga was stunned. Obsession, she sighed and finally patted her shoulder. This is all I can say. Whether you can do it or not, it's up to you. Cultivation. Maybe for you there are a lot of things you have to give up. Emo Chenga thought hard. Obsession. Because I've longed for too much since I was a child, I have an obsession? She seemed to understand, but she was also a bit confused. She handed her another bottle of wine. Don't think too much. If you could figure it out so easily, it wouldn't be an obsession. This requires fated chances, so take your time. After drinking another bottle of wine, her head became even more dizzy. In a daze, she heard Shi teasing her. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you've never drunk wine before? Who drinks it like water like you do? In a daze, Emo Chenga raised her head and saw that there seemed to be several Chin's eyes swaying in front of her. She tilted her head and reached out to hold his head. Senior Marshal Brother Chin, what's wrong? Do you know phantom technique? She was stunned for a moment, then he burst into laughter. In the end he laughed so hard that he hit the ground. If I knew this earlier, I would have made you drink earlier. Unexpectedly, Emo Chenga stared at him for a while, then stood up and walked unsteadily towards the water. She shouted from behind her, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, what do you want to do? She was still swaying as she walked. Wash my face. She walked to the edge of the pool and crouched down. When she saw her reflection in the water, she was suddenly stunned. She hadn't paid attention to her appearance for a long time. Today she finally realized that it was very different from what she remembered. Her originally sparse eyebrows now had eyebrows, the outline of her face seemed to have deepened, and her cheeks were plump. She already had the appearance of an adult. Although her head was still muddled, she was still frightened because her face looked more and more like a woman's. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, are you done? Hearing the voice behind her, she hurriedly held the water to wash her face, but the face she saw was still bright and beautiful. She was afraid she would discover her, so she didn't dare to look back. She panicked and thought, could it be that someone has noticed me? Junior Marshal Brother Yi? Her foot slipped and she suddenly lost her balance and fell into the pool with a plop. Junior Marshal Brother Yi. This scene made she dumbfounded. After a while he saw Emo Chenga struggling in the water, so he finally regained his composure. He sprang up and instantly grabbed her, who was floating in the water, and went back to the shore. He couldn't help but shake his head. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you've really drunk yourself silly. As a cultivator you actually drowned. Where's your light body technique? He looked down and felt even more helpless. This wasn't just an ordinary kind of silly. She actually choked on water and fainted. She put Emo Chenga down under the tree. He thought for a moment, then raised his hand. In his hand was a bright-colored peach branch. The peach blossoms were still blooming, and there was dew in the center of the stamen as if they had just been plucked from the tree. He muttered a few words in a low voice. Finally he waved his hand and shouted, "Go!" Soon after, the two of them disappeared into thin air. From Shi's point of view, the two of them were still in their original place. It was just that there was a faint light barrier surrounding this small area. He lowered his head to look at the unconscious Emo Chenga. A thoughtful expression appeared on his face. After a long time, he stretched his hand to her wet neck and felt around. Soon he pulled out a jade pendant strung with a red string. It was a round jade pendant with a warm color and clear cloud patterns. He sighed. Sure enough. Chapter 71. When Emo Chenga woke up from her sleep, she felt a splitting headache. She propped herself up. The room was dark, so she rubbed her head in a daze. Strange, how did I fall asleep? She sat up and circulated her energy to cultivate a small circle. Only then did her head stop hurting. She also slowly remembered what happened before she fell asleep. No, it should be before she got drunk. How shameful. She never drank before, yet she tried to drown her sorrows with alcohol. The worst thing was that she actually forgot herself after getting drunk. She groaned and fell back. Fortunately, there was only Senior Marshal Brother Chin at that time, so no one saw Senior Marshal Brother Chin. She hurriedly sat up and touched her body. Fortunately, her clothes were intact and the psychic jade pendant was still there. She breathed a sigh of relief, but she felt a bit regretful. She didn't remember what happened before she got drunk. She only vaguely remembered that she told her to let go of her obsession to continue on the path of cultivation, but she felt like she forgot something. She thought for a long time, but she really couldn't remember, so she simply ignored it. Since she couldn't remember, it wasn't important. What was important was that she had to warn herself that she couldn't relax her vigilance like this again. Fortunately, she didn't do anything to her. Otherwise, her secret might have been exposed if it was someone else. With this thought in mind, she got out of bed to freshen up. She then took out several moonstones from her Chenkuan bag and threw them on the bed. The room instantly became bright. Although her clothes were intact, they were wrinkled and smelled of alcohol. Emo Chenga frowned and walked to the washstand in the corner. She then took off her coat and wiped her face. When the smell of alcohol dissipated, she took out her new clothes and put them on. She was about to untie her hair and comb it again when she suddenly saw her reflection in the bronze mirror. She froze. She thought for a moment, picked up the comb, scattered her hair, carefully parted it and coiled it into a bun. During this process, her hair was combed crookedly several times because of her rusty technique. When she finished, she couldn't help but smile bitterly at herself in the mirror. She hadn't dressed as a woman for almost 10 years, and she didn't even know how to comb her hair. The person in the mirror was unpleasant no matter how she looked at it. She then scattered her hair again and combed it into an ordinary Taoist bun. However, the face in the mirror was still too handsome for a man. After thinking for a while, she rummaged through her Chenkuan bag and found a few things. First, he used a long black strip to thicken his eyebrows. Then he poured out some gray powder from a jade bottle and smeared it on his nose, the corners of his eyes, and his lower jaw. Now that she looked at the person in the mirror, she noticed that he had sharper facial features and thicker eyebrows. He looked more like a man. He carefully erased some of the traces before putting the items away. These two items were actually smithing materials. But since they weren't poisonous, it wouldn't matter if he used them to wipe his face. The most important thing was that the foundation building pill was right in front of him, so he had to be a bit more careful. Once she was done with everything, she returned to the bedside and took out her Chenkuan bag from inside her robe. She tidied it up, then sat down cross-legged to cultivate. Actually, she had gained many things from this trial. Just the corpses of the demonic beasts were already a great fortune. There were also pills, spirit tools, and all kinds of materials. Just the spirit stones alone amounted to over 1,000 pieces. Emo Chenga felt quite conflicted after she returned. Working hard for several years wasn't as good as killing a few people. Fortunately, she suppressed the injustice in her heart in time. If she ignored this ruthless thought, it would lead her to become a devil in the future. Unknowingly, several hours passed. The sky outside was already bright. Emo Chenga withdrew her spiritual aura, jumped out of bed, tidied up her clothes, opened the door and walked out. Outside the hall, Qin was sitting in his usual position, drawing talismans. When he heard her voice, he didn't even raise his head. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you finally woke up. Thinking about yesterday, Emo Chenga felt a bit uneasy. Seeing that his expression wasn't abnormal, she finally felt relieved and said, "What's wrong?" To get the foundation building pill. She put away his brush and paper. When he turned his head, he was stunned. His reaction made Emo Chenga a bit nervous. Was the makeup on my face too obvious? After a while, she shook his head. I'm really muddle-headed. I feel like you're a bit different today, but I can't see what's different. Emo Chenga felt a bit relieved. She smiled dryly. How could it be? Aren't we getting the foundation building pill? Let's go. She nodded. The two of them walked out together. While walking behind them, Emo Chenga secretly wiped her sweat. Originally, the four of them always moved together in this room. Now that Su Jingji wasn't here and Louis Dao was being treated by the foundation building seniors in the North Peak because of his serious injuries, this room suddenly became a lot more deserted. If this wasn't the case, Qin wouldn't necessarily be so close to her. It was only because the others were gone that they had no one to talk to except each other. The south peak of Mount Yunwu was still the same as before. The morning light shone faintly and a cool breeze caressed their faces. However, two of the people who used to travel with them were missing. Emo Chenga sighed softly. When they reached the steward's hall, there were already a lot of people waiting in line. The two of them obediently waited outside. Soon it was Emo Chenga's turn. She walked in and handed over her identity tablet. After the identity tablet was verified, she left a spiritual aura imprint on another jade slip before she cautiously took a jade bottle from the steward's martial uncle and carefully put it away. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this was the lifeblood of aura-refining disciples. The other disciples who received the foundation-building pill were all ecstatic, but she was still relatively calm. When she also received the foundation-building pill, the two of them went back together. Senior Marshal Brother Qin, you've reached the peak stage of the aura-refining realm for quite some time, right? Do you want to enter closed-door meditation immediately? I should. What about you, Junior Marshal Brother? I'd better wait for a while. I haven't reached the peak stage of the aura-refining realm yet. It won't be too late to enter closed-door meditation after I'm a bit more confident. That's good too. After they returned, Emo Chenga and Qin went back to their respective rooms. Emo Chenga stayed in her room for a while before she opened the door again, preparing to go down the mountain. After receiving the foundation-building pill, this matter was officially over. The prohibition against disciples leaving the monastery without permission was also lifted. She naturally had to go down the mountain to see second uncle first. However, since she just received the foundation-building pill, she was afraid she'd be targeted by others, so she pretended to come back to pack her things before setting foot on the road down the mountain. She first went to Yunwu Sect's shop to exchange the spirit stones she consigned for medicinal pills. She also sold the demonic beast corpses she obtained this time. During this period of time, there would be a lot of people selling demonic beast corpses, so she wasn't afraid of being too conspicuous. On the other hand, when the shop assistant saw the pile of corpses, he felt great admiration. This assistant was also a disciple of Yunwu Sect, so he naturally knew about the competition this time. Since there were so many demonic beast corpses, the person who obtained them must be someone with superb skills. Therefore, he didn't dare to be negligent and respectfully gave her the spirit stones. Emo Chenga took the bag of spirit stones. She didn't count it and just threw a spirit stone as a reward. After that, she returned to second uncle's small courtyard after making many turns. Second uncle. A cough came from inside the room. Emo Chenga pushed the door open and saw an old man with a face full of wrinkles on the bed. She revealed a smile and said, "Second uncle, I'm back." Yi Jiang raised his eyelids and looked at her for a long time with his cloudy eyes. He then coughed and said with a hoarse voice, "Xiaodun, you're not injured, are you?" "I'm fine." Emo Chenga hastily shook her head and sat on the small stool beside the bed. She then took out the jade bottle containing the foundation building pill and said happily, "Second uncle, look. I got the foundation building pill." Seeing the jade bottle, Yi Jiang took it with trembling hands. He opened the jade bottle and sniffed it. He then closed his eyes and nodded. "Yes, this is the foundation building pill. Xiaodian, you've worked hard." Emo Chenga repeatedly shook her head. "I'm just lucky." There was an accident in this test, so it was much easier to distribute the foundation building pills. Yi Jiang showed a loving smile and looked at her with pity. Do you think second uncle doesn't know what happened? Forget it. It's good that you came out alive. His reproachful tone was actually warm and caring. She held second uncle's already withered hand and smiled sincerely. Second uncle, you don't have to worry. I'm very powerful now. I diligently cultivate every day, and I've also learned how to fight against others. I won't be soft-hearted anymore. Second uncle, I'm telling you, in this test. After spending 2 hours, Mo Chenga rambled on about what happened in this test. Yi Jiang smiled as he listened. Sometimes he praised her for her calmness in handling things, and other times he gave her careful pointers, telling her how to handle things better. Mo Chenga felt she gained more from this conversation than she did from her own experience. With this thought in mind, she felt a bit depressed. If it wasn't for second uncle, what would she do? When she finished talking, Yi Jiang sighed and said, Xiaodian, you've really grown up from the way you handled things this time. Second uncle is relieved. Even if you can't build your foundation this time, you're still young. It shouldn't be a problem for you to try a few more times. His words were like his last words. Mo Chenga bit her lip, grabbed second uncle's hand and whispered, Second uncle, how could Yi Jiang not know what she was thinking? He smiled and stroked her head. Don't be like this. You're already an adult. You don't need second uncle by your side. If you form your gold core one day, go back to the Yi clan in the secular world and see if there are any descendants with spiritual roots. If there are, you don't need to rebuild the Yi clan. You can just pass down cultivation techniques. Second uncle, she shouted angrily. Yi Jiang's expression turned serious and he said sternly, Xiaodian, it's not that you don't have to face it if you don't mention it. You have to remember that you're a cultivator, and a female cultivator at that. If you can't even accept reality, how can you go on? It's much more difficult for a female cultivator to achieve something than a male cultivator. Your aptitude isn't outstanding, and you don't have any clan elders to rely on. If you don't have a firm heart, you might as well give up early. Second uncle had never spoken to her in such a harsh tone. Mo Chenga was stunned. She lowered her head but didn't say anything. Yi Jiang softened his tone. Do you still remember what second uncle has taught you all these years? You don't have good aptitude and you don't have a backer, so you have to be stricter with yourself. You can't be weak, you can't be greedy, and you can't indulge in emotions. You have to remember that weakness and passion are the enemies of female cultivators. Not only today, but you also have to calmly accept second uncle's death. If you fall in love with him in the future, you have to restrain yourself. You have to know that people are fickle and the world is unpredictable. How could she not know this? But Yi Jiang once again closed his eyes and revealed a calm smile. Life and death are part of the heavenly Tao's reincarnation cycle. You and I are both cultivators, so we should understand the principle that the heavenly Tao cycle is endless. Cultivators, and only when you cultivate the heavenly Tao can you become a true immortal. Go back and carefully comprehend it. When you can calmly face second uncle's death, you can come see me again. Mo Chenga was silent. After a long time, she finally gave him the medicinal pills, bid him farewell and left. Weakness and passion are the enemies of female cultivators. The heavenly Tao cycle is endless. Only when you cultivate the heavenly Tao can you become a true immortal. Mo Chenga stood in the courtyard and closed her eyes for a moment before she resolutely walked out. Chapter 72. After obtaining the foundation building pill, Qin Shi really did as he said and went into closed-door meditation to make a breakthrough. On the north peak of Mount Yunwu, there were some places with especially abundant spiritual aura. Most of these places were the Immortals' Caves of high-level cultivators, but there were also a few places that were opened as public Immortals' Caves. The so-called public Immortals' Cave was an Immortals' Cave that everyone could use. However, they would have to pay a considerable amount of rent to the sect. However, if it was for the sake of building one's foundation, it would be completely free and one would even have priority. These public Immortals' Caves were protected by formations both inside and outside, and there were also foundation building cultivators guarding them in shifts. Under normal circumstances, unless the time limit for closed-door meditation was over a year, no one would be disturbed at all. It was indeed the best place for closed-door meditation to attack the foundation building realm. Going into seclusion to build his foundation would take at least 3 to 5 months, and at most a year. The first 2 months were used to nourish his body. Then he would eat a foundation establishment pill and spend a few more months to absorb and adapt to it. If he built his foundation, he would have to spend more time to stabilize his cultivation. Whether Qin Shi succeeded or failed, it would take him a year and a half before he could come out of closed-door meditation. Emo Chinga, on the other hand, didn't think much of it. She was just envious and bored. What she envied was that before Qin Shi left, his expression was calm and without the slightest bit of worry. He seemed to be very confident, so he must have learned some kind of secret technique. As for Emo Chinga, she herself still had to spend a year or two to reach the peak stage of the aura refining realm and increase her chances of building her foundation. What was boring was that Qin Shi wasn't here, so she had no one to talk to. Louis Dao's injuries were quite heavy, so he would have to stay in the North Peak for at least 3 to 5 months. Murong Yen, with the help of her clan, also went to a public immortal's cave to enter closed-door meditation in order to advance to the peak stage of the aura refining realm. There was another person whom Qin Shi was slightly familiar with, Senior Marshal Brother Zhou. However, just like Qin Shi, he also obtained a foundation-building pill and went to a public immortal's cave to enter closed-door meditation in order to advance to the foundation-building realm. If he wasn't too unlucky and ended up in the 12th layer of the aura refining realm, he would have been Marshal Uncle Zhou in the future. As for Jiang Shanghong, who was the only one left in the room, she simply didn't count him among her acquaintances. Ever since the matter of the school being annexed happened, not only did this guy ignore her, but he also became even more gloomy. Speaking of which, it was strange. When Jiang Shanghong first entered the school, he was already in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm. Now that Qin Shi had gone into closed-door meditation to make a breakthrough, why didn't he make any movements? Of course, she wouldn't ask Jiang Shanghong out of curiosity. After all, they weren't friends. Actually, after this trial, if she wanted to go to a public cave for closed-door meditation, she also had money. From the cosmos bags he obtained, there were more than 1,000 spirit stones. The demonic beasts he hunted were sold for another 1,000 spirit stones. In addition, some unimportant materials and spirit tools were sold for several hundred spirit stones. Altogether, there were more than 3,000 spirit stones. Coupled with medicinal pills, some spirit tools that weren't convenient to sell, and possibly useful materials, she was now unprecedentedly rich. She wasn't inferior to ordinary foundation-building cultivators at all. However, she felt that it was better to keep a low profile. She didn't even take out the corpse of the iron-toothed crocodile. Of course, she wouldn't do something as extravagant as renting an immortal's cave. Thus, the days returned to tranquility. Every day he would cultivate and occasionally listen to sermons. He didn't even take any errands in the steward's hall. Fortunately, after this incident, the school exempted disciples in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm and above from doing chores, so it didn't matter if he didn't take any errands. After being reprimanded by second uncle and losing contact with him, he was unprecedentedly focused on his cultivation. Coupled with the large amount of medicinal pills he consumed, it only took him 3 months to reach the aura refining perfection stage. She herself was rather surprised by this. She hadn't expected herself to have such a cultivation speed. Louis Dao was still in the North Peak. She heard a martial uncle admired him very much and wanted to accept him as his disciple. Upon hearing this news, she suddenly realized she hadn't seen Louis Dao for a long time. After thinking about it carefully, it seemed they had become a lot more distant. In the end, she felt a bit guilty, so she decided to find some time to visit Louis Dao. However, this plan didn't come true in the end because she was stopped when she went to the North Peak. She could only ask a senior martial brother to pass her a message and transfer several unimportant things to him. She gradually heard about the reason why Jiang Shanghong didn't attempt to build his foundation. As it turned out, Jiang clan had a kind of medicinal pill that could assist in building one's foundation. It could increase one's chances of building one's foundation, but it wasn't easy to concoct. Only a small amount of medicinal pills were produced each time. Originally, with Jiang Shanghong's diligence and cultivation level, he should have been able to obtain one. Unfortunately, he was despised in Jiang clan. Moreover, Jiang Qingxian, a direct descendant of the current clan head, was also going to build his foundation this time, so Jiang Shanghong's share was given to Jiang Qingxian. Jiang Shanghong could only grit his teeth and accept the result. Foundation-building pills weren't easy to obtain, so he planned to endure until the next batch of medicinal pills was made. What Jiang Shanghong said was pure speculation, but in any case they had known each other for more than 3 years. Based on Jiang Shanghong's personality, it was very likely he would think that way. Emo Chinga felt a bit envious when she heard this news. There was actually a medicinal pill that could increase one's chances of building one's foundation. However, since this kind of medicinal pill existed, the sect had never heard of it. It wasn't that the pill recipe was too complicated or the materials were too rare, so they couldn't be provided to ordinary disciples. Even Jiang Shanghong couldn't obtain Jiang clan's things, let alone her. Therefore she could only be envious. When she reached the peak stage of the aura refining realm and her cultivation couldn't advance any further, Mo Chenga went down the mountain. Although second uncle severely reprimanded her last time and ordered her not to see him until she figured it out, Mo Chenga still came to see him once every half a month. However, second uncle only said a few words to her before he drove her back to the mountain. This time, however, it was different. She had something very important to say. Second uncle. Yi Jiang, who was still recuperating in the small room, looked even older. When he heard her voice, he didn't even open his eyes. Why did you come here? Go back and cultivate. Mo Chenga didn't give up. She said, Second uncle, I've reached the peak stage of the aura refining realm. Yi Jiang finally opened his eyes. After sizing her up, a faint smile appeared on his face. 3 months. That's more like it. Mo Chenga heaved a sigh of relief when she saw that second uncle finally didn't look so tense anymore. She sat in front of the bed as usual and asked, Second uncle, are you all right? I won't die for the time being. Upon seeing her worried expression, Yi Jiang's heart finally softened. He said slowly, Second uncle's injuries have been very good recently. I reckon he can hold on until next year. Mo Chenga lowered her head in silence. This was indeed good news. 2 years ago, second uncle said that his lifespan was only 2 or 3 years. Now, at least he could confirm that it was the longer one. Alright, since you've reached the peak stage of the aura refining realm, you should strive to build your foundation. Are you ready to build your foundation? Mo Chenga shook her head, feeling very confused. Second uncle, I can feel that my cultivation level is no longer a problem, but I'm still lacking something if I enter closed-door meditation to build my foundation. What is it? Yi Jiang muttered. Second uncle has already explained to you how to build your foundation and made you familiar with the process. Logically speaking, you should be well prepared. Do you have any doubts? After hesitating for a moment, Mo Chenga nodded and said, Whenever I think about building my foundation, I always feel flustered. I don't have any confidence at all. I guess so. Yi Jiang understood. It seems that you weren't mentally prepared. This is a bit difficult. If you forcibly enter closed-door meditation to build your foundation, your mentality will be unstable, and your state will also be unstable, which will affect the success of building your foundation. Yes, I can't make up my mind to enter closed-door meditation immediately. Second uncle, what should I do? Yi Jiang said, It's no wonder you feel that way. Most people cultivate until the peak stage of the aura refining realm and wait a long time for foundation building pills so they're fully prepared. But because of second uncle, you're in a hurry to cultivate until the peak stage of the aura refining realm and are about to build your foundation. Then what should I do? Yi Jiang closed his eyes as if he was thinking. Mo Chenga stared at him anxiously. She knew that although second uncle's situation was a bit better than she expected, he only had 1 year left to live. She wanted second uncle to see her build her foundation before he passed away and leave with peace of mind. Therefore she couldn't afford to delay this 1 year. Yi Jiang finally opened his eyes. He seemed to have made a decision. After staring at her for a long time, he said slowly, Chenga, you should leave the mountain and travel around for a while. Mo Chenga was dumbfounded. Travel? Doesn't that mean I have to leave Mount Yunwu and second uncle? Yi Jiang nodded. Yes. Whenever a cultivator is stuck in a bottleneck or their state of mind is unstable, traveling is the best solution. But, Mo Chenga said anxiously, wouldn't that mean I have to leave this place? Second uncle, how can I leave you here alone? Yi Jiang showed a faint smile. Are you worried that second uncle will suddenly die here? Mo Chenga was speechless. She was indeed afraid. She was afraid that if second uncle passed away, she still wouldn't be able to build her foundation. However, she was even more afraid that second uncle would finish his last journey alone while she was gone. Yi Jiang sighed. Rest assured. When the end of a cultivator's lifespan is near, their perception of destiny will also become stronger. After making this decision, second uncle feels that he can still wait until you come back. Go. If you stay, I'm afraid it'll take more time. Second uncle, be obedient. Mo Chenga struggled for a long time but still shook her head resolutely. No. What if something unexpected happens? I won't go. What if you have to go? I absolutely won't go. Yi Jiang closed his eyes as if he didn't want to argue with her anymore. He knew how stubborn this child was. When he was seriously injured while hunting demonic beasts, his companions threw him on the road. It was this child who ran into the forest to find him regardless of her life. In the end, the two of them escaped from a life-and-death situation. Xiaotian, take second uncle's natal primordial spirit tablet and go on your way. Mo Chinga was startled, but she only called out in a daze, second uncle? Yi Jiang closed his eyes and sighed. If anything happens to second uncle, you'll know when you see that primordial spirit tablet. Do you feel relieved now? Yi Jiang didn't say anything else to her. He took out a jade tablet from his robe, made a hand seal with his right hand and muttered something. A moment later, a drop of bright blood appeared between his eyebrows. He sped up his chanting and made a cut with his fingertip. The drop of blood instantly followed his hand and entered the jade tablet. The jade tablet immediately turned from white to dark red. After doing this, Yi Jiang coughed violently several times. Second uncle. Mo Chinga hastily supported him and patted his back. After a while, Yi Jiang regained his breath. He waved his hand and handed the jade tablet to her. If something happens to me, the natal blood essence inside it will be lost. If you see its color change, you can come back immediately. Mo Chinga silently took it. It seemed that second uncle had made up his mind to give her a natal jade tablet. Yi Jiang waved his hand and ordered her to go back. He said, "All right, go back to the sect and report this. Pack your things and go out to travel. Remember, open your mind and don't think about cultivating. Come back in half a year." Mo Chinga was silent for a moment. A moment later, a decisive expression appeared on her face as she nodded. "I understand, second uncle." Chapter 73. It was normal for cultivators to travel when they reached a bottleneck. Many aura refining disciples who reached the peak stage of the aura refining realm but felt they were still lacking in the foundation building realm would choose to travel. Therefore, Mo Chinga only needed to report to the steward's hall to get permission. Traveling wasn't a sightseeing tour, but a search for fated chances. Fated chances sometimes had a greater impact on cultivators than aptitude. For example, 1,000 years ago, there was a cultivator with poor aptitude who unexpectedly reached the nascent soul realm and possessed great divine power, allowing him to move unhindered in Kunwo for a while. Of course, fated chances were also hard to come by. Fated chances like this only appeared once in many years. For most people, being able to obtain some spiritual plants or spiritual objects or have an epiphany that allowed them to break through their bottlenecks was already extremely good. Mo Chinga didn't have such a delusion. With her aptitude, if she relied on unobtainable fated chances, she probably wouldn't make a realm breakthrough even if she had 800 years of lifespan. Moreover, to be exact, her situation wasn't a bottleneck but an unstable state of mind. Because she was pressed for time and her aptitude was too poor, she didn't have any hope of successfully building her foundation, so she couldn't calm down. After thinking for a long time, Mo Chinga felt it was better to go to some big cultivation groups and communicate with their disciples. In any case, she was still young and had already obtained a foundation-building pill, so there was no need for her to take risks for fated chances. With that decided, she bid farewell to second uncle and left Mount Yunwu. This was her first time traveling alone. Ever since she came to Kunwu, she had never left second uncle to go on a trip alone. However, she was no longer the little girl who came to Kunwu for the first time. She had seen a lot and was confident she could handle any situation she encountered. Mount Yunwu was located in a small corner of East Kunwu. Before it was annexed, there were only Zixia sect and Jindao school nearby. The nearest cultivation group was also thousands of miles away. Aside from some small cultivation groups, the closest one was undoubtedly the head of Kunwu's 7 great cultivation groups, Righteous Path's Tiandao sect. The 7 great cultivation groups in Kunwu were Tiandao sect, Xianqing school, Gujian sect, Biyun sect, Zhengfa school, Lingshou sect and Danding school. Among them, the Spirit Beast sect and the Danding school, one was a beast-taming sect and the other was a pill-concocting sect. Both of them were unorthodox sects, and they only had slightly more people than the middle-level cultivation sections. However, because these two sects were quite skilled in beast-taming and pill-concocting, their sects were much stronger than the middle-level cultivation sections. Therefore, they were ranked as one of the 7 great sections. The stronger ones were the Biyun sect and the Zhengfa sect. Zhengfa sect was a Taoist sect. Most of the disciples in the sect were dressed as Taoist priests. However, Biyun sect was a peculiar sect. The disciples recruited by the sect were all very beautiful regardless of whether they were male or female. There were many female disciples, so there were many dual cultivation partners in the sect. After them were Gujian sect and Xianqing school. Gujian sect was a cultivation group for sword cultivators. Sword cultivators spent their entire lives cultivating only one sword, and most of their divine abilities were focused on one sword. Sword cultivators had always been a bit more powerful than ordinary cultivators in fights of magical power, but it was also harder for them to make a realm breakthrough. Therefore, although Gujian sect's high-level cultivators were only about the same as Jingfa school and Biyun school, their strength was actually a bit higher. Gujian sect had always been considered to be on par with Xianqing school. Xianqing school's strength was second only to Tiandao sect. Like Jingfa school, it was also a Dao school. For several thousand years, Tiandao sect had always been regarded as the leader of the righteous path in Kunwu. It was located in the northeast of Kunwu and was separated from the devil path by a mountain. Tiandao sect was different from other cultivation groups. Its unique characteristic was that it didn't have any unique characteristics. It didn't have any cultivation techniques, and it didn't force its disciples to cultivate anything. Unorthodox cultivation techniques were fine, and it didn't even care if they cultivated devil cultivation techniques as long as they didn't violate the sect's commandments. Tiandao sect's strength was precisely due to its tolerant management method. Every Tiandao sect disciple was treated equally regardless of what they cultivated, so there were many special talents in the sect. Mo Chenga wanted to go to Tiandao sect because it was the leader of the righteous path and its disciples cultivated a variety of things. Not only could she gain more experience, but she also didn't have to worry about any accidents. Although there were no absolute righteous people among cultivators, people of the righteous path still didn't encourage fighting, so it would be a bit safer to interact with disciples of the righteous path. Not far from Mount Yunwu, Mo Chenga found a place to change out of Yunwu sect's disciple uniform and put on very ordinary clothes. Yunwu sect had already been annexed by Zixia sect, and that unforeseen event happened a month ago, so it was better for her to be a bit more cautious. Soon after, she used the light body technique and headed northeast. In the past, when she wandered with second uncle, Mo Chenga once met a cultivator who was actually a martial artist in the secular world who entered the Dao through martial arts. She was very interested in their so-called martial arts and body techniques, so she learned some of them. In the past few years, from the Immortals Assembly to the Foundation Building Pill competition, she benefited a lot. When she used the light body technique, she was also faster than ordinary cultivators. In less than half a month, she arrived at the boundary of Tiandao sect. Tiandao sect's sphere of influence was very large. This area already belonged to it. In fact, there were only a few small cultivation groups attached to it in the surrounding area. However, the market square here was very special. It actually held a Dao assembly at a fixed time and invited foundation building cultivators from Tiandao sect to participate. Anyone could participate in this Dao assembly as long as they paid the entrance spirit stones. Moreover, they could raise questions to the cultivator giving the lecture and discuss the Dao with each other. Mo Chenga was very interested in this Dao assembly. Since the entrance fee wasn't expensive, she waited here. In addition, she also sold some spirit tools that weren't convenient to sell near Mount Yunwu in batches. Because the flow of people here was quite complicated and it was quite a distance from Mount Yunwu, these spirit tools were sold smoothly and earned her a lot of spirit stones. After coming out of a shop, Mo Chenga turned a corner and took off her robe. She changed her appearance and revealed her true appearance. When she went to the shops to sell spirit tools, she used the transfiguration technique to disguise herself into various different appearances because she still couldn't let people know the origin of these spirit tools. Besides, these shops didn't care whether the customers used the transfiguration technique or not. It was fine as long as they couldn't see her true appearance. She leisurely walked around the corner and released her divine sense. She didn't find anything unusual, so she faintly smiled and went into another shop. This shop's appearance was simple and didn't have any decorations. There were several brocade boxes on the counter, containing spirit tools, talismans, medicinal pills, and some miscellaneous items. The shopkeeper was a mortal woman. When she saw Mo Chenga, she greeted her enthusiastically, "Master Immortal, what do you want?" Mo Chenga was just strolling around, so she didn't answer immediately. She casually sized up the spirit tools on the counter before she turned to look at the woman. But when she turned her head, she was stunned. This woman was in her 20s and was quite beautiful. Although she was a mortal, she wasn't much worse than a female cultivator. Of course, this wasn't why Mo Chenga was surprised. What surprised her was that this woman looked so familiar. Mo Chenga carefully thought about it, but she couldn't remember when she saw this woman. Master Immortal? Mo Chenga regained her composure and saw the woman looking at her anxiously. She suddenly realized that she hadn't answered for a long time but had been staring at this woman for a long time. Moreover, she was now dressed like a man, so she must have scared this woman. Emo Chinga thought it wasn't convenient to explain, so she asked, "What do you sell in this shop?" Seeing that Emo Chinga's expression was normal, the woman promptly smiled and introduced, "Look at these spirit tools, talismans and medicinal pills. They're all excellent. In addition, this shop also sells talisman paper and talisman brushes. They're all made of high-grade demonic beast materials. Please take a look." Emo Chinga had already swept her eyes over the things displayed on the shelves. The spirit tools were only common goods. They weren't high-grade spirit tools. The talismans were also low-grade talismans. She didn't know about the medicinal pills, but judging from the other things, they were probably just common medicinal pills. She just sold a lot of spirit tools and she had a lot of talismans and medicinal pills on her, so she basically didn't need them. Thus, she casually grabbed a handful of talisman paper, a talisman brush and some cinnabar. "How many spirit stones do you have here?" The woman looked at them, then said with a smile, "These talisman papers and cinnabar only cost 1 spirit stone, but this talisman brush costs 7 spirit stones." For the current Emo Chinga, 8 spirit stones weren't much. She immediately took out 8 spirit stones from her Chengkuan bag and placed them on the counter. The woman was very happy that a business deal was completed so easily. She wrapped up the things she wanted and handed them to Emo Chinga, then said respectfully, "Master Immortal, these are the things you wanted." Emo Chinga took them and was about to leave when a young cultivator came into the shop. This cultivator was only in the 5th layer of the aura refining realm. He wore ordinary clothes and looked exhausted, but his face was handsome and looked quite elegant. As soon as the young cultivator entered the shop, the woman who guarded the shop called out happily, "Husband, you're early today." As it turned out, he was this woman's husband. This wasn't uncommon. Female cultivators were originally fewer than male cultivators, and many low-level female cultivators were taken as concubines by high-level cultivators. It was often very difficult for low-level male cultivators to find a Dao companion, so many of them married mortal women as their wives or concubines. Emo Chinga didn't know whether this beautiful woman in front of her was a wife or a concubine. The cultivator responded faintly with a very cold expression. Once he raised his head and saw Emo Chinga, he immediately smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, do you need anything?" Emo Chinga naturally knew she was already in the top layer of the aura refining realm, so this cultivator didn't dare to look down on her. It was just that he was so cold to his wife, yet he greeted others with a smile, which made her a little unhappy. Especially when she turned her head and saw the faint loneliness in the woman's eyes, she felt even more sad. It was basically impossible for a mortal woman to get equal status with a cultivator. To put it nicely, they were wives and concubines, but to put it bluntly, they were playthings. So what if she was a female cultivator, let alone a mortal woman? She recalled Shinbing. She had good qualifications and had the backing of her family, but she was still dragged down by her beauty and became someone else's concubine. Thinking up to this point, Emo Chinga suddenly lost her mood and coldly said, "It's nothing." The cultivator didn't care about her indifference and still said enthusiastically, "Fellow Taoist, you can look around more. Everything else in my shop isn't good, but the talisman papers and talisman brushes are all good. I personally made them." Before Emo Chinga could say anything, the woman already said, "Husband, this Master Immortal has bought talisman papers and talisman brushes in the shop." "Really?" The cultivator smiled awkwardly. "That being the case, thank you for your patronage, fellow Taoist. Please make yourself at home." Emo Chinga nodded slightly, but she didn't want to leave. She pretended to be interested and started to examine the spirit tools on the shelves. The woman was about to introduce them, but Emo Chinga waved her hand and said, "No need to greet me. If you like them, you'll tell me." Seeing that Emo Chinga didn't want to be disturbed, the woman retreated. Seeing her husband's tired appearance, she hurried back and forth to serve tea. Emo Chinga sighed inwardly. She really didn't understand. This cultivator obviously didn't treat his wife well, so why did this woman still love him so much? "Husband, you came back so early today. Did everything go smoothly?" Upon hearing his wife's question, the cultivator opened his eyes. He then took out a cloth bag from his Chengkuan bag and threw it to the side. "My luck was bad today, so I only managed to pick these. You can go and tidy them up." The woman nodded, then picked up the cloth bag and went inside. Upon seeing this, Emo Chinga casually picked several talismans, paid several spirit stones and left. Chapter 74. When Emo Chinga washed her face in the evening, she suddenly understood why she felt that woman's face was familiar. After removing her disguise, her face in the mirror was clearly somewhat similar to that woman's. The similarities were in their eyebrows and facial contours. The facial contours were fine, but their eyebrows and eyes were too similar. If she hadn't disguised herself, she might have been discovered on the spot. Was strange. She didn't have any sisters, and the closest relatives were all in the secular world. It was impossible for Yi Clan's people to still stay in Kunwu, right? Second uncle said that when he moved Yi Clan to the secular world, he especially left a message that unless they had spiritual roots, they would never set foot in Kunwu again. This woman was a mortal, so she obviously didn't have spiritual roots. She stood in front of the mirror for a while, but she couldn't figure out why, so she returned to the bed and meditated. If she wanted to figure it out, she would go and ask her tomorrow. After reaching the peak stage of the aura refining realm, she discovered that the spiritual aura in her body had changed. She practiced 2 cultivation techniques. One was the art of Sunu, and the other was the greenwood art. Because the art of Sunu was faster, it was her main cultivation technique, while the greenwood art was her secondary cultivation technique. However, the spiritual aura absorbed by these 2 cultivation techniques was about the same. Although the greenwood art absorbed with spiritual aura, it also absorbed a small amount of other spiritual aura. The art of Sunu, on the other hand, could absorb any kind of spiritual aura. The spiritual aura absorbed by the 2 cultivation techniques was mixed together, so there was no difference. However, after reaching the peak stage of the aura refining realm, a wisp of Yin spiritual aura gradually appeared in her body. It was very small, but it was very different from other spiritual auras. The 2 wisps of spiritual aura circulated in her meridians, neither interacting nor repelling each other. She didn't have time to tell second uncle about this, but it didn't seem harmful at the moment, so she just let it be. Now that she had reached the peak stage of the aura refining realm, cultivating couldn't increase her spiritual aura. It could only make her spiritual aura purer. Emo Chenga was just used to cultivating, so she would meditate when she had nothing to do. However, something surprising happened during her habitual cultivation this time. The 2 unrelated wisps of spiritual aura in her dantian and meridians were still circulating separately, but the wisp of Yin spiritual aura gradually became more abundant. After discovering this phenomenon, she did an experiment. In her dantian, she separated the 2 types of spiritual aura into 2 strands and let them slowly come into contact with each other. As a result, not long after, the mixed spiritual aura of each attribute decreased a little, and the cool spiritual aura increased a little. Once she verified that this cool spiritual aura could nibble away at her original spiritual aura, she immediately stopped cultivating. Although she could control the 2 spiritual auras at the moment and there was no difference, she still hadn't figured out what was going on with this cold spiritual aura. It was best not to act rashly. After pondering for a while, she felt that this Yin spiritual aura might be Yin aura produced by cultivating the art of Sunu. However, the cultivation technique didn't mention this change, so she didn't dare to confirm it. Generally speaking, the sky was Yang, the earth was Yin, men were Yang, and women were Yin. Actually, both men and women had Yin and Yang in their bodies. It was just that men had more Yang and less Yin, while women had more Yin and less Yang. As a result, the cultivation techniques of the cultivation world were created specifically for female cultivators, and all of them leaned towards the Yin attribute. Since the art of Sunu could only be practiced by female cultivators with pure Yin constitution, it must be even more so. However, she had never heard that the spiritual aura produced by female cultivators was different from that of male cultivators, so she couldn't be sure whether this was Yin aura or not. The night passed very quickly. Emo Chinga packed her things and went out. Today was the opening day of the Dao conference jointly organized by the market square. On this day every month, the surrounding cultivators would flock to this place. Most of them were aura refining cultivators who yearned to enter Tiandao sect. Occasionally, there were also foundation building cultivators who wanted to discuss Dao with Tiandao sect's cultivators. Emo Chinga had already inquired about the location of the Daoist sanctum. After taking several detours, she directly walked towards an ordinary small courtyard. The gate of the small courtyard was open, and there were 2 low-level cultivators guarding the gate. Occasionally, people would come and hand over spirit stones in exchange for an identity tablet. Emo Chinga followed behind them, handed over 2 spirit stones, received a wooden identity tablet with a number engraved on it, and entered the small courtyard. Soon after, she passed through a central room and was led into another room. She then walked up a staircase leading to the underground. After making many turns and walking for a while, she finally entered a hall. This hall was enormous, not much smaller than Yunwu sect's preaching palace. It could accommodate at least 1,000 people. The innermost part of the hall was a high platform with several praying mats on it. Below the platform, tables, chairs, and praying mats were all available. After listening to the receptionist's introduction, Mo Chinga finally learned that if one paid an extra spirit stone, they could sit on a chair. At that time she simply didn't ask and only paid the admission fee, so she could only sit on a praying mat. In any case she didn't care, so she found a corner that was neither too far nor too close to sit down and closed her eyes to rest. In fact, most people still sat on praying mats. 2 spirit stones per month was already quite a lot for individual cultivators. Ordinary aura refining disciples of Yunwu sect only received 5 spirit stones per month. People entered the Taoist sanctum one after another. After a long time the number of people gradually increased. When the hall was gradually full, Mo Chinga opened her eyes and observed her surroundings. There were quite a lot of people who came, but only 20% of the seats were empty. Among these people, some were loose cultivators dressed casually, some were disciples of small sects dressed in sect uniforms, and some were disciples of big clans with attendants. It seemed this Tao conference was very successful. Not only individual cultivators came, but even people from cultivation groups and clans were willing to come. This made her look forward to this Tao conference a bit more. There were still people coming in from the outside. It wasn't until the people who came occupied the 9th floor that the people gradually stopped coming. A quarter of an hour later the hall's door was closed. At the same time, the small door at the innermost part of the hall opened, and several aura refining cultivators led a foundation building cultivator to the high platform. At the same time, all the aura refining cultivators in the hall stood up and saluted. Seeing this, Mo Chinga also followed the crowd. This foundation building cultivator was a man in his early 30s. He wore a light purple Taoist robe with white edges. His expression was calm and he looked a bit like an immortal. Mo Chinga couldn't sense which stage of the foundation building cultivator he was in. Unless low-level cultivators practice some kind of secret technique, they wouldn't be able to sense the specific cultivation level of high-level cultivators. However, the lifespan of foundation building cultivators was between 300 to 400 years. This cultivator looked like he was only in his 30s, so his real age was probably less than 100 years old. Based on the average age of foundation building cultivators, he could be considered young. The foundation building cultivator sat down on a praying mat in the middle of the high platform. He glanced at the audience and said, "Greetings ladies and gentlemen. I'm Wen Xiangdao from Tiandao sect. Today I'll give a sermon to everyone. If any fellow Taoists want to come, you're also welcome." The man paused for a moment then continued, "I think everyone has probably heard a lot about cultivation experiences. Why don't I tell everyone about my foundation building experience today?" Hearing this, Mo Chinga immediately became spirited. Originally, she was only interested in this kind of Tao conference organized by market squares. She didn't expect they'd talk about foundation building experiences. This was exactly what she wanted to hear the most right now. As for foundation building experiences, the martial uncles in Yunwu sect who gave sermons also talked about them to aura refining disciples who were about to build their foundation. However, she didn't know how they compared to the foundation building cultivators in Tiandao sect. She wasn't the only one who was excited. The others were even more excited. It must be known that individual cultivators rarely had the opportunity to hear about this kind of content. Although clans' descendants and disciples from small cultivation groups had the opportunity, this was a cultivator from Tiandao sect, the number 1 cultivation group in the celestial pole. It was definitely different from what their seniors said. When Xiangdao paused for a moment as if he was thinking about how to start. After a while he slowly said, "I think everyone knows how aura refining cultivators build their foundation. First, they have to cultivate until they reach the peak of the 10th layer of the aura refining realm. Second, they have to take a foundation building pill. Then they have to enter closed door meditation for a year and a half. If they succeed, they'll advance to the foundation building realm. If they fail, they'll remain in the aura refining realm. If they're relatively lucky, they'll enter the 11th layer of the aura refining realm. Now, I'll talk about my process and experiences in building my foundation. I have 3 spiritual roots and am very ordinary in Tiandao sect. The cultivation technique I practice is also a very ordinary 5 elements cultivation technique. I was lucky enough to obtain a foundation building pill, and as a result, I succeeded in building my foundation on my first try. I think many of you are as ordinary as I am. Ordinary people like me have very little hope of building their foundation, but you're also hoping that your ancestors will be blessed with luck and you'll be able to enter the foundation building realm in one go. But what I want to tell you today is that building your foundation isn't just about luck. As we all know, spiritual roots affect the speed at which one absorbs spiritual aura, affects the effect of cultivation, and also affects the probability of advancing to the next realm. It can be said that people with few spiritual roots are more suitable for cultivation than those with mixed spiritual roots. Some people can advance to the next realm easily, while others have to struggle bitterly. Of course, you shouldn't be delusional enough to think that building your foundation has nothing to do with spiritual roots. That's impossible. However, as long as you have enough patience, you can still slightly shorten the distance between you and people with natural spiritual roots. Many cultivators, after cultivating until the peak of the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, are anxious to immediately advance to the next realm. In fact, there are still several factors that affect the success rate of building your foundation. One of them is the density of your spiritual aura. His last sentence surprised Mo Tiange. Density of spiritual aura? What does that mean? When Xiangdao went on to say, "Do you know what kind of changes will happen to your body after you build your foundation?" He swept his gaze over everyone. As he expected, everyone was silent, so he continued, "Let me tell you something. If you build your foundation, your meridians will become wider, your dantian will become bigger, and the spiritual aura that originally flowed between your dantian and meridians will become liquid. This way your body will have extra space to continue absorbing spiritual aura." By now you should have already guessed what I'm going to say. Yes, if you stay in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm for a long time, your spiritual aura will become a bit purer, and it'll be very easy for you to achieve the condition of turning your spiritual aura into liquid. Mo Tiange had never heard of this theory before. Second uncle only told her that it would be difficult to build his foundation if time was too tight, but he never mentioned these reasons. Mo Tiange didn't know whether this theory was concluded by Tiandao sect or not, but she immediately concentrated on recording everything in a jade slip. She planned to tell second uncle when she went back and let him judge whether it was the correct explanation. When Xiangdao talked non-stop for an hour before he finally finished explaining this part. He paused for a moment, then started the next part. In addition, I also want to tell everyone that just because inner demons appear only in the core formation realm, you shouldn't ignore your mentality. You're right, inner demons indeed won't appear in the foundation building realm, but your mentality will affect your behavior and also affect your confidence. Don't ignore your mentality. A person with a stable mentality will start building his foundation in an orderly manner and will be able to calmly solve problems he encounters. This way, from another perspective, will also increase his chances of building his foundation. Chapter 75. Since no foundation building cultivators came to discuss Dao, the Dao meeting ended. Nevertheless, everyone was satisfied. On her way back, Mo Tiange was still thinking about what the Tiandao sect cultivators said. In fact, there were only 2 points. One was to purify her spiritual aura as much as possible, and the second was to calm her mind so that she could easily meditate before building her foundation. Although Tiandao sect's summary of foundation building experience wasn't limited to these 2 points, it was better than nothing. If she could gather more information about foundation building, she'd have more confidence in building her foundation. A calm mind was easy to handle. Mo Tiange originally came out to travel because she was pressed for time, so she was flustered. Presumably she'd be fine after a while. The first question made her a bit embarrassed. Because the spiritual aura in her body had undergone a special change, she didn't dare to cultivate. She could only wait until she went back and asked second uncle. After returning to the inn full of worries, she suddenly remembered she hadn't asked about yesterday's matter. Just as she was about to go out, she suddenly saw a figure going upstairs, so she hurriedly went back to her room. It was a somewhat ear-piercing male voice with an oily tone that made people feel uncomfortable. "Today we finally have a place to stay. We don't have to sleep in the open." Someone immediately said, "Senior Marshal Brother Jiang, you can stay in this room. It's comfortable." The oily male voice seemed to size up the room and said with satisfaction, "The inn in this small place isn't bad. All right, quickly choose and serve some good wine and dishes." Soon after, the waiter said, "Yes, yes. Master Immortals, please choose as you please." After that, she heard the sound of the door closing. They must have entered the room. Mo Tiange thought for a moment but didn't release her divine sense. The person she saw was the one called Senior Marshal Brother Jiang. He seemed to be Jiang Shanghang's cousin, Jiang Qingxian. Jiang Qingxian was really lucky. During the last foundation building pill test, people from Zixia sect and fellow disciples from Yunwu sect wanted to kill him, but he still managed to escape alive. Moreover, it was said that the current master of Mount Yunwu had already prepared everything for him to build his foundation. However, it was really strange. Why did Jiang Qingxian come out when he was about to build his foundation? She quietly opened the door. Seeing that there was no one in the corridor outside, she cast an illusory transformation technique and left the inn. She walked into the same shop as last time. The shopkeeper was still that beautiful mortal woman. Upon seeing her, she greeted her enthusiastically. "Immortal master, what would you like to buy?" Mo Chenga took the form of an ordinary-looking youth. She lowered her voice and asked, "What do you have here?" His tone was quite unkind, but the woman didn't say anything. She continued to introduce enthusiastically, "Our shop has all kinds of ordinary things. The best are talisman paper and talisman brushes." "Let me have a look." The woman took out a pile of talisman papers and various colored talisman brushes and placed them on the counter. "Please feel free to take a look." Mo Chenga glanced at her then said calmly, "You don't seem to be that great." The woman still smiled and said, "Of course it's nothing special. However, the craftsmanship of making talisman paper and talisman brush is passed down in my husband's family. I don't see such good quality in cheap goods in other shops." "So, the things in your shop are very cheap?" The woman said, "Immortal master is not from here, right? A small shop like ours indeed can't compare to a big shop. We rely on low prices to keep a foothold. Otherwise, if everyone went to a big shop with a full range of goods and top-quality goods, our shop wouldn't be able to continue operating." Mo Chenga naturally understood this. Back then she also opened a shop with her uncle. Their small shop couldn't compete with the big shops, but many small cultivators still came because they didn't have much money and couldn't afford to buy things from the big shops. The big shops also didn't bother to compete with the small shop for this small amount of money, so the small shop could survive. Later they were bullied because second uncle was, after all, a foundation-building cultivator. He also had some wealth, so his collection was very complete. He also had some top-quality aura refining goods, so he began to compete with the big shops for customers. Mo Chenga pretended to be skeptical. "Is that so?" The woman said, "Immortal master, take a look. These talisman papers are made from a mixture of Wenxing bamboo and demonic beast blood. Wenxing bamboo is hard, so the paper it makes is airtight. It's not inferior to top-quality talisman papers. As for this talisman brush, it's made from the fur of a blood-frost wolf. Each strand is carefully selected. All of these were hunted by my husband, so I guarantee they're genuine." Mo Chenga took a look, but for a moment she didn't say whether she wanted it or not. Instead she started to size up the other things in the shop. She pretended to be careless and asked, "You said this is a craftsmanship passed down in your husband's family, so you're also from a cultivation clan. Why does your shop look so shabby?" The woman's smile froze for a moment, but she immediately smiled and said, "A small clan naturally can't open a big shop. Immortal master, please take a look. If you need anything, just call me directly." As she spoke, Mo Chenga secretly sized her up many times. The more she looked, the more she felt they resembled each other. From her probing, she could tell that this husband and wife didn't have any backing. That being the case, she didn't care about a fifth-layer aura refining cultivator. "I have something to ask, madam." The woman was still smiling, so Mo Chenga asked, "May I know madam's name?" Once she said that, the woman suddenly looked nervous. She took a step back and her face turned green and white. Mo Chenga smiled and said, "Madam, don't be afraid. I don't have any ulterior motives." Although she explained it this way, she was now dressed like a man and was also a cultivator. It would be strange if the woman wasn't afraid if she suddenly asked for her name. Seeing that the woman was still hesitating, Mo Chenga released her spiritual aura pressure. The woman was only a mortal, so how could she withstand it? She retreated several steps and leaned against the wall. In the end she gave in and said, "My surname is Mo." Mo Chenga was dumbfounded. After a long time she thought of another possibility and anxiously asked, "Mo as in stranger?" The woman nodded. "Yes." Mo Chenga stared fixedly at her. Finally she found some traces of the past on the woman's face. As it turned out, this woman wasn't a member of Yi clan, but rather the Mo clan where she lived for 10 years. Mo Chenga's expression was uncertain. In the end she said tentatively, "Tianxiao?" The woman was shocked. She stared at Mo Chenga with great astonishment, both because of her name and because of the sudden change in her voice. Upon seeing her reaction, Mo Chenga knew she guessed correctly. After a long time she finally calmed down. With a wave of her hand, she withdrew the shape-shifting technique and wiped off the disguise on her face. From the woman's shocked expression, Mo Chenga could tell that the two of them had similar appearances. The woman's face turned pale and then red. She was extremely excited. You're Tiange? Mo Tiange nodded and sighed. Tianxiao, I didn't expect we'd meet again. Mo Tianxiao covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks. After a long time she suddenly threw herself at Mo Tiange. Tiange, is it really you? Mo Tiange supported her and said warmly, it's really me. Don't cry. It's not easy for us to meet again. You should be happy. Yes. Mo Tianxiao hastily wiped the tears off her face and went to close the door. Wait a moment. I'll close the shop first. Let's talk in the back. Mo Tiange nodded, then closed her eyes to calm herself down. Although she wasn't as excited as Tianxiao, she was still very happy when she got the answer. Not long after she arrived in Kunwu, she followed second uncle to wander around. Gradually she realized she couldn't go back and had to give up everything in the secular world. If there was anything she was reluctant to leave in that family, it would be Tianxiao. She also felt sad in silence, thinking she would never see Tianxiao again. But she never expected the two of them would meet again and it would be like this. Mo Tiange followed Tianxiao back to the inner room and looked around. There was a small courtyard behind the house. It was very neat and tidy, but it could also be seen that they didn't have a good life. Mo Tianxiao, who had already wiped her tears, looked at Mo Tiange's appearance and said in amazement, Tiange, why are you dressed like this? Mo Tiange smiled bitterly. It can't be helped. The cultivation world is the same as the secular world. It's more convenient to be a man. First, tell me, how did you come to Kunwu? And, you even married a cultivator. She still remembered that eldest aunt raised Tianxiao like a daughter from a noble family and wanted her to marry into a wealthy family. She also always thought Tianxiao would be like that. Mo Tianxiao smiled, then sighed softly. As it turned out, when Mo Tiange was taken away by an immortal, Tianxiao learned about this world and was full of curiosity about it. When she was 16 years old, her family arranged a marriage for her to the young master of a rich family in Feiyun town. Tianxiao was originally very dissatisfied with this marriage because the young master she was going to marry was simply a hedonistic son of a rich family. He didn't like to study, didn't know how to do business, and liked to have illicit affairs. Her resistance was futile, so she secretly ran out of the Mo family's village. She unexpectedly ran into a passing cultivator. Because of their reverence for immortals and because Tianxiao vowed to never agree to the marriage, after the cultivator resolved the conflict, her family finally agreed to let them be. Soon after, the cultivator was about to leave the Mo family's village. Tianxiao, who originally yearned for the cultivation world very much, left with him. After listening to this, Mo Tiange was silent. Tianxiao wasn't a woman who meekly accepted adversity, so it wasn't strange for her to resist the marriage. What was strange was, how did Tianxiao become like this? She couldn't help but ask, was he good to you? Tianxiao was lost in thought for a while before she said, in the beginning he treated me really well. We wandered in the secular world for several years before we arrived in Kunwu. His father was also a cultivator, but he died in an accident during a fight of magical powers. When we arrived in Kunwu, we relied on the craftsmanship passed down in his family to open a small shop here. Maybe it was because life was too dull, or maybe it was because cultivation was too difficult, but it gradually faded away. Although this was the case, Mo Tiange still didn't understand. Could a dull life turn Tianxiao into what she was today? She never thought this gentle woman would be the Tianxiao who loved to play and laugh in the past. Mo Tianxiao forced a smile and said, don't just talk about me. What about you? Your cultivation level is very high now, right? When you came yesterday, my husband said your cultivation level was much higher than his. Mo Tiange said, I'm already in the peak stage of the aura refining realm, but I don't have a chance to build my foundation. This time I came out to travel and see if there are any fated chances. She didn't tell the truth, not because she wanted to hide it from Tianxiao, but because she wanted to hide it from her husband. Right now, she still couldn't figure out that person, so it was better to be a bit more careful. Mo Tianxiao didn't really understand these things, so she asked, then how have you been all these years? When I left the Mo family's village, that person took me to find my second uncle. Later, I followed my second uncle and wandered everywhere. A few years ago, we finally settled down in a place and I also entered a cultivation group. Because my father left some things for me, I was lucky enough to cultivate to the peak stage of the aura refining realm. Mo Tiange roughly recounted her experiences in the past few years, skipping over some things that were hard to explain. To be honest, she didn't have a good impression of Tianxiao's husband, so there were a lot of things she didn't tell him. Tianxiao originally had a lively and jumpy personality, but now she was so gentle and obedient, working hard to guard the small shop and humbling herself to entertain customers. If she hadn't confirmed that this was really Tianxiao, she wouldn't have believed it. However, Tianxiao's expression was so calm. Even though she felt wronged in her heart, she did it willingly. Emo Chinga didn't understand. Could love really change a person? Chapter 76. A voice came from outside. Soon after, the door leading to the shop was opened and someone said tiredly, "Wife, why did you close the door?" Tianxiao hastily stood up. "Husband, Before she could say anything, the cultivator had already stepped into the main house. When he saw Emo Chinga, his expression changed. His gaze moved back and forth between the two of them and anger appeared on his face. However, he was afraid of Emo Chinga's cultivation level, so he endured it. Emo Chinga knew he was thinking the wrong way, but Tianxiao already said, "Husband, do you remember I told you I have a younger sister who's also a cultivator?" The cultivator was stunned and looked puzzled. Tianxiao then said, "What a coincidence. Kunwu is so big but we actually met." The meaning of her words was very clear. The cultivator's puzzled gaze fell on Emo Chinga. "You mean?" Emo Tianxiao pulled Emo Chinga's hand and said with a smile, "This is my younger sister." Younger sister? He stared at the 10th layer aura refining cultivator in front of him. She really didn't look like a woman. Upon seeing this, Emo Chinga took the initiative to salute him. "I'm Emo Chinga." The cultivator hastily returned the salute, but his gaze was still puzzled. Tianxiao explained, "Husband, Chinga only disguised herself as a man for convenience." "Oh, I see." When he regained his composure and looked at Emo Chinga again, a smile appeared on his face. "Please don't take offense at my rudeness just now. I'm Tianxiao's husband, Meng Sigue." Meng Sigue, this name was indeed elegant. Emo Chinga showed a faint smile. "I came too suddenly." Seeing that they were friendly, Emo Tianxiao felt relieved and said, "Husband, you can chat with Chinga for a while. I'm going to make 2 dishes." Meng Sigue nodded. "And rest assured." Tianxiao then said to Emo Chinga, "I know you cultivators don't like to be involved in worldly affairs, but you probably haven't eaten your hometown's dishes for a long time. Why don't you eat with me today?" Emo Chinga naturally wouldn't refuse. "Of course I also want to." Tianxiao smiled. "That's good. You can chat with your brother-in-law first. I'll be back soon." Okay. Tianxiao went to the kitchen, leaving only the two of them in the main room. Meng Sigue said, "Fellow Taoist Emo, please take a seat." However, he didn't dare to call her name directly because her cultivation level was much higher than his. In front of her he felt pressured. After the two of them sat down, Emo Chinga showed a faint smile and said, "Since brother-in-law and Tianxiao are husband and wife, we're family. There's no need to call me fellow Taoist. You can directly call me by my name." Although she still didn't trust Meng Sigue, she was still willing to get closer to him out of consideration for Tianxiao's feelings. Meng Sigue heaved a sigh of relief at these words. The difference between the 5th layer of the aura refining realm and the 10th layer was too big. Although he was indeed Emo Chinga's brother-in-law in name, he was still a bit worried. Emo Chinga didn't take him seriously at all. With these words, at the very least, he had a rough idea of how he should interact with the other party. In addition, his mind became active again. Tianxiao's younger sister has already reached the 10th layer of the aura refining realm at such a young age. Could it be that she has some kind of backer? If that was the case, if he could get her help, Meng Sigue smiled and said, "Since that's the case, I won't be polite." He paused for a moment then asked, "I didn't have time to ask just now, but Chinga, how did you two recognize each other?" Emo Chinga said, "When I came to your shop yesterday, I already had some suspicions, but I didn't dare to be sure. Today I couldn't help but come again. In the end, when I asked, it turned out to be true. Speaking of which, even I can't believe it. Kunwu is so big, yet we actually met." "Yesterday?" Meng Sigue paused for a moment, then an astonished expression appeared on his face. "So you're the one from yesterday." There were many customers in the shop these past 2 days, and Emo Chinga was disguised yesterday, so he didn't remember. Emo Chinga smiled and nodded. "That's me." Meng Sigue shook his head. "I really couldn't tell. If brother-in-law could tell, I'd cry. I've also put in a lot of effort to disguise myself as a man. It's more convenient to dress up as a man when we're outside." "That's true." Meng Sigue nodded. "People's hearts are sinister, so we should be more vigilant. Tianxiao usually stays behind to look after the shop. If the market square wasn't strictly managed, I wouldn't feel at ease." Based on what he said, he seemed to have some true feelings for Tianxiao, but Mo Chenga didn't know whether he was telling the truth or lying. Mo Chenga pondered for a moment, then said with a smile, "Brother-in-law, I heard from Tian Xiao that you opened this shop because of your family's hereditary craftsmanship?" Meng Sigue waved his hand with a smile. "Just to make a living." He then sighed and said, "I don't have any other skills, my aptitude isn't good, and I don't have a clan to rely on. My path of cultivation is very difficult, so I can only let Tian Xiao live with me through this kind of bitter life. I'm really sorry for her." Mo Chenga comforted him. "Brother-in-law, why are you discouraged? You're still young, so there's always hope." Meng Sigue said, "I know what I'm doing. The shop's profits are meager and I can't rest for even a day. I don't have time and I don't have enough spirit stones. Compared to you, Chenga, I'm really too ashamed to show my face." Mo Chenga showed a faint smile. "It's also luck. In fact, my aptitude is also very poor." "Oh." Meng Sigue was surprised. "Chenga, you're still young, but you're already in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm. How could you? I'm endowed with 5 spiritual roots. Can brother-in-law believe me? I just had some fated chances. As for building my foundation, to be honest, I don't have much hope." When Tianxiao came back, she saw the two of them chatting happily. They were both cultivators, so they naturally talked about cultivation. Meng Sigue had a lot of questions about cultivation that he couldn't figure out, so he brought them up to discuss. Mo Chenga saw that his words were pleasing to the eye, so she patiently told him about her experiences. Meng Sigue's comprehension was pretty good. He wasn't a stupid person. It seemed he was also troubled by his spiritual roots. Tianxiao returned to the main room with a plate of food and placed a small bowl of noodles in front of Mo Chenga. Mo Chenga was stunned. After a long time, she heaved a sigh of relief and said with a nostalgic expression, "Meat noodles?" She remembered that when they went out as children, they always liked to order a bowl of meat noodles from the snack stalls in town. Eating one bowl wasn't enough, but because they wanted to save some space in their stomachs, they didn't dare to eat a second bowl. Mo Tianxiao looked at her and smiled. Her eyes were faintly shining. "It took me a long time to learn. Try it." She took a bite and nodded. "It's delicious. It's the same as before." In fact, she had long forgotten what meat noodles tasted like. The days in Mo family's village were too distant, so distant that she forgot to recall them. Gradually she forgot some things. But she never forgot that feeling. Tianxiao, who gave her true love during her lonely days, was something she would remember for the rest of her life. After they finished eating and chatted for a while, Mo Chenga stood up and said goodbye. Mo Tianxiao complained, "Since you're just passing by, you might as well stay at my place." Mo Chenga smiled and shook her head. "You don't have enough space here, so I won't add to your troubles. How about you rest for a few days and go to an inn to talk?" Tianxiao hesitated for a moment before nodding. "That's fine. I understand." Before leaving, Mo Chenga took out a jade bottle from her Chengkuan bag. "I don't need this bottle of medicinal pills anymore, so I'll give it to you." Tianxiao paused for a moment before firmly pushing it back. "Who do you think I am? We're sisters. Since we met in a foreign place, we should naturally get together. There's no need to be so polite." Mo Chenga smiled and said, "You'll know once you go back and ask your husband. I'm in the peak stage of the aura refining realm now, so these medicinal pills are already useless to me. I'm just giving them to you so they don't take up too much space. Even if you don't accept them, I still have to sell them. Why should I let others take advantage of me? Besides, it's just a bottle of medicinal pills. Why are you being so polite? Who do you think I am? Just accept it. Let me show you our sisterly affection." Tianxiao was finally moved. She said helplessly, "All right, I can't out-talk you." Mo Chenga stuffed the jade bottle into her hand. "I'll go first. There's only one inn in this town. Just go there and find me. By the way, the name I'm using now is Yi Xiaotian." Chapter 77. By the time she left, it was already late at night. The shops in the market square had long been closed, and there were only a few scattered lights on the street. Under these faint lights, Mo Chenga slowly walked towards the inn. That night, she talked with Tianxiao about many things that happened after they parted. The two of them were no longer the little girls from back then, and the image of each other was also very different from the image in her memory. Many things had to be talked about in detail. Just like how she couldn't adapt to Tianxiao becoming so gentle, Tianxiao also didn't expect she would live like a man now. She recalled how Tianxiao was passionate and lively while she was quiet. No one expected the next time they met would be like this. The affairs of the world were truly unpredictable. In addition, Mo Chenga deliberately observed her husband. Meng Sigue was very polite to her but not overly affectionate. Although he wasn't very considerate to Tianxiao, he wasn't bad. She secretly asked Tianxiao whether Meng Sigue was good to her or not. Tianxiao only sighed and said this was the nature of a husband and wife. At first their love was strong but gradually, it was worn away by life. Meng Sigue didn't treat her badly, but he was a cultivator and she was a mortal, so he inevitably looked down on her. Upon hearing this, Mo Chenga knew she shouldn't intervene between husband and wife, so she didn't say anything. In fact, she roughly understood Meng Sigue's mentality. He gave up the glory and wealth of the secular world and came to Kunwu because he wanted to take a step forward on the path of cultivation. However, his aptitude wasn't good and his life was difficult, so he was naturally depressed and cared less about the people around him. However, thinking about it, she still felt a bit disheartened. Tianxiao had been married for only 4 or 5 years, but their love had already faded. If they were cultivators, they would spend most of their time cultivating. After hundreds of years, how much love could they have left? Wouldn't it be very sad if they became strangers? Thinking up to this point, she smiled bitterly in her heart. Sure enough, it was better not to get involved in matters of the heart. If she was like Tianxiao, wholeheartedly attached to someone but couldn't get the same treatment, she would rather be alone for the rest of her life. Not far from the inn, Mo Chenga looked up and suddenly stopped. 2 figures came out of the inn and sneakily disappeared into the darkness. If they were other people, she definitely wouldn't poke her nose into other people's business. However, she happened to know these 2 people. One of them was Jiang Qingxian and the other was his follower, a short youth. She stood there and thought for a moment. Then she made a prompt decision to retract her aura and follow them. Jiang Qingxian was at the critical juncture of building his foundation, but instead of staying on Mount Yunwu, he appeared here. There had to be a reason. In addition, she also heard that this person relied on the fact that he had a core formation elder. Although he had cultivation-level treasures, he didn't necessarily have any divine abilities, so she was confident she wouldn't be discovered. The 2 of them also retracted their auras and ran madly. Mo Chenga had to spend quite a bit of effort to follow behind them at a distance that was neither too far nor too close. He didn't know what these 2 people's goal was, but they ran for 2 hours straight and he almost lost them a few times. 2 hours later they entered a call and the 2 finally slowed down. Seeing as they didn't notice her presence at all, she cautiously approached them. The 2 of them seemed to be looking for something. After circling around, Jiang Qingxian impatiently asked, "Are you sure it's here?" When the short man heard this, he replied in a flattering tone, "Senior brother Jiang, I did see that kid running here. His cave residence should be nearby. Then hurry up and look for it." "Ah?" As if he hadn't expected that Jiang Qingxian would hand over the hard work to him just like that, the shorty sounded somewhat unwilling. "What's wrong?" "And nothing. Senior brother Jiang, please wait here for a moment. I'm going to scout around." "And go quickly." Soon after, the shorty reluctantly left, leaving Jiang Qingxian alone in this place. Mo Chenga pondered for a moment then decided to stay where she was. No matter what happened, this person would eventually come back to look for Jiang Qingxian, so she might as well just wait here. From their conversation just now, she could roughly guess that they seemed to be looking for trouble with someone. However, this shouldn't be their purpose for coming from Mount Yunwu. Because the spiritual aura in this call was meager, the person who built his immortal's cave here should be an individual cultivator. She didn't believe they would run all the way from Mount Yunwu just to deal with an individual cultivator. There must be some other reason. From what she saw, it wasn't hard to guess that they must have had a conflict with someone in the market square when they passed by this area. Then they suddenly decided to teach that person a lesson. After a long time, the shorty who was instructed by Jiang Qingxian to scout still hadn't returned. Jiang Qingxian seemed to be somewhat impatient, so he stood up and looked around for a while before muttering, "Why is this guy so slow?" Right now Jiang Qingxian was completely defenseless. If they wanted to kill him, it would be a heaven-sent opportunity. However, Mo Chenga wasn't Su Jingji. During the turmoil caused by the destruction of Yunwu's sect, she didn't suffer any losses, so she didn't have any hatred towards Jiang clan. Besides, although this place wasn't Mount Yunwu, Jiang clan still had 2 core formation seniors. If they found out, they'd be in big trouble. She definitely wouldn't do such a stupid thing. After a while, when Jiang Qingxian couldn't sit still anymore, there was finally some movement. "Senior Marshal Brother Jiang, I found it." The shorty hurriedly ran over and gestured in a certain direction. "It's over there, but that formation is very powerful." Jiang Qingxian said arrogantly, "With the heaven-breaking mirror in my hand, There's no formation I can't break. The shorty nodded repeatedly. Yes, yes, Senior Martial Brother Jiang. Shall we go now? And lead the way. Heaven-breaking mirror? Mo Chinga couldn't help but frown. Second uncle once told her there was a type of unorthodox magic weapon or spirit tool that specialized in breaking formations. Could this heaven-breaking mirror be one of them? Still following behind them, Mo Chinga didn't walk too far before she discovered traces of a formation among a mountain rock. This formation was called the Clear Sky and White Sun Formation. It was a rarely seen formation with extreme yang power and wasn't a common formation. Its power was comparable to her 5 elements life and death formation, but it was slightly inferior in terms of hiding traces. Of course, this was only in her eyes. If she didn't have a foundation in formations, she would have to spend a lot of effort to discover it. Apparently, the master of this formation was also a talented person. The formation wasn't simple, and the place where it was laid was also good. The two of them stood outside the formation and no longer hid their spiritual auras. Jiang Qingxian signaled the shorty to shout, "Brat, your grandfather's here. Quickly come out and accept your death." After shouting, he waited for a while but there was no movement at all. The shorty continued to shout, "Surnamed Wei, don't think we can't do anything if you don't come out. My senior martial brother Jiang has a spirit tool that specializes in breaking formations. If you don't want to die, obediently come out and hand over the constitution-enhancing pills, then we'll spare your life." Mo Chenga was stunned. Constitution-enhancing pills? Could it be that these two people took a fancy to someone else's medicinal pill so they came to rob it? Speaking of medicinal pills, although she didn't concoct them, she knew a lot about them. However, she had never heard of constitution-enhancing pills. Judging from Jiang Qingxian and the shorty's behavior, it probably wasn't a simple medicinal pill. At this time, an angry voice finally came from inside the formation. "So it's you guys." The shorty laughed shrilly and said, "Isn't that your grandfather? What do you think? Hand over the medicinal pills and we'll let you live." "Don't even think about it." The voice became increasingly angry and sneered. "Don't you want to rob me of my constitution-enhancing pills? In your dreams. If you have the ability, then come and take them yourself. You refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. You better think it through." Faced with this threat, the person inside the formation snorted coldly and no longer spoke. The shorty turned his head and looked at Jiang Qingxian to ask for advice. "Senior Martial Brother Jiang?" Jiang Qingxian hesitated for a moment before a stern expression appeared on his face. He said in a low voice, "Kill. He's just an individual cultivator. We must get our hands on the constitution-enhancing pills in his hands. We'll just kill him." Mo Chinga was quite far away, so she could only vaguely hear what he said. However, when she heard the word kill, she was slightly surprised. Cultivators cherished their lives, so they rarely fought with their lives. Unless there was a grudge between them or if there was enough profit involved, they wouldn't easily kill each other. This cultivator said they came to kill him because they coveted the constitution-enhancing pills in his hands. What was this constitution-enhancing pill in the end? If this cultivator was really an individual cultivator, they would be in danger today. Jiang Qingxian had already cultivated to the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, and the shorty beside him was also in the 8th layer of the aura refining realm. In addition, Jiang Qingxian definitely had a treasure on him. If this person fought against them, the odds were against him. At this moment, Jiang Qingxian took out his spirit tool. Sure enough, it was a mirror. Presumably, it was the heaven-breaking mirror they were talking about. The mirror shone on the formation. In the absence of light and moonlight, a blue light shot out from the mirror and fell on the mountain rocks. Suddenly, a burst sound came from several places. A formation disc flew out. Mo Chenga was shocked. She didn't expect this spirit tool to be so powerful. She calculated in her heart. If it was her 5 elements life and death formation, it probably wouldn't be able to block this mirror for long. After the formation was broken, an immortal's cave suddenly appeared between the mountain rocks. Jiang Qingxian and Mo Chenga glanced at each other, then cautiously stepped inside. Mo Chenga didn't move from her hiding place. She hesitated for a moment, but in the end she decided not to meddle in other people's business. This wasn't something she could meddle in. She also couldn't afford to provoke Jiang Qingxian. The sound of fighting came from inside the immortal's cave. It didn't last long before she heard a scream from inside. She didn't know if the individual cultivator had already been killed. However, the sound of fighting continued. After a long time, the sound finally stopped. A person covered in blood staggered out of the cave. Mo Chenga focused her gaze and saw that it was Jiang Qingxian. Once Jiang Qingxian came out of the immortal's cave, he immediately used light body technique and flew away. This scene puzzled Mo Tiange. Could it be that he suffered a great loss? She waited patiently for a while, but there was still no movement from the immortal's cave. After thinking for a moment, she secretly used her divine sense to probe the immortal's cave. Soon after, she was stunned. There was no one alive in the immortal's cave. After confirming there was no one else in the surroundings, she came out of her hiding place, took out her greenwood sword and walked towards the immortal's cave. Once she entered, she saw a mess. Their fight of magical powers was obviously very fierce. The immortal's cave was already beyond recognition. Fragments of rocks and walls were everywhere. There were 2 corpses on the ground. One was the short man who was with Jiang Qingxian, and the other was an unfamiliar cultivator. Presumably he was the one surnamed Wei they mentioned. Mo Tiange approached them and carefully examined them. Neither of them had a Qingquan bag on them. Apparently Jiang Qingxian had taken them. She also didn't know what the constitution-enhancing pills they were talking about were, but in the blink of an eye, these 2 people actually fought to their deaths. After observing her surroundings, Mo Tiange saw a bookshelf lying on the ground among the rock fragments. She then picked up a jade slip that was still intact. Because she was worried Jiang Qingxian would return, she didn't even dare to deal with the corpses. She left the immortal's cave, circled around the mountain, and casually looked for a place to hide. Chapter 78. Mo Tiange laid a concealment formation and hid herself inside it. She stared at the jade slip in her hand and sighed. She felt she was becoming more and more cold-blooded. She still remembered that when she was a child, she always liked to read books in the ancestral hall's library. At that time, what she envied the most were the chivalrous heroes in the novels. They were skilled in martial arts, wielded swords, and traveled the world. Now that she had a cultivation level, she realized she couldn't even compare to the secular chivalrous heroes. Perhaps it could be said that this was the iron rule of the cultivation world. There were only immortals and no chivalrous heroes. There were also the few remaining righteousness and eternal benefits. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but laugh at herself. Why did she have to find excuses for herself? She was clear about what she could and couldn't do. She didn't want to be a bad person, but she also wouldn't casually be a good person. There were some things she shouldn't meddle in if she didn't have the ability. Otherwise, not only would it be useless, but it would also bring disaster to herself. Besides, in this world where everyone pursued their own interests, she didn't think she could change anything. The only thing she could restrain was herself. After calming down, she separated a strand of her divine sense and entered the jade slip. This jade slip was filled with densely packed words. She skimmed through them, but she was stunned. The content was the constitution-enhancing pill they mentioned. The jade slip wrote that constitution-enhancing pill was a miraculous medicinal pill passed down from the distant past era. If taken together with other medicinal pills, the effect would be enhanced, regardless of whether the medicinal pill was taken by an aura-refining cultivator or a nascent soul cultivator. What was even rarer was that most of the materials weren't rare. Only a few kinds of spiritual plants required a high age. Aside from some heaven-defying miraculous pills, this effect was simply unparalleled. According to the jade slip, if a cultivator took one during the foundation building realm or core formation realm, it was equivalent to increasing their chances of making a realm breakthrough. Mo Tiange was so excited that she felt a bit dizzy. She really didn't know where the cultivator Jiang Qingxian killed obtained it and how Jiang Qingxian knew about it. After a while, she finally calmed down and thought of several problems. First, this constitution-enhancing pill had such a miraculous effect, so she absolutely couldn't let others know about it. Otherwise, her poor life would be in danger. Second, she didn't know how to concoct medicinal pills and she couldn't give this thing to others. Did she have to learn concocting medicinal pills? The first problem wasn't difficult to solve. She wasn't a flamboyant person anyway, so she'd just keep this pill recipe for later. However, the second question made her hesitate for a moment. One had to know that the path of alchemy was not simple. Alchemists were all made up of countless herbs. The feeling of the ingredients, the control of the heat, and even the timing of opening the furnace were all inexplicable knowledge. One had to go through countless times of opening the furnace to slowly master it. Therefore, generally, powerful alchemists were cultivated by cultivation sects or large cultivation clans. Among small clans and rogue cultivators, alchemists were not only rare, but also had a low success rate. Although Mo Tiange felt that she could still be considered wealthy at present, it was still too difficult for her to train a concoctions master with just 3,000 spirit stones. Besides, she still didn't know whether she had the talent or not. After studying it for a while, she frowned, put away the jade slip, and looked outside. She sensed someone approaching. After a while, sure enough, someone hurriedly ran over. It was Jiang Qingxian. Emo Chinga pondered for a moment. She guessed that Jiang Qingxian might have come back for the jade slip in her hand. 2 people must have died just now, so he was nervous and left in a hurry. Now that he thought about it, he came back to search. Now that the jade slip was in her hands, she naturally wouldn't take it out. Presumably, she didn't leave any traces at the scene, so there shouldn't be any flaws. She calmed down and waited. Sure enough, after a while, Jiang Qingxian left flustered and exasperated. He simply didn't notice that she, the Oriole, had been following him, the mantis. With a faint smile, she continued to study the pill recipe. To be honest, she didn't take Jiang Qingxian seriously at all. He was merely a hedonistic young master. Although he had a cultivation level and treasures, he didn't like cultivating and liked to order others around, so his fighting skills were definitely not good. The fact that she followed him for so long without being discovered was proof. In this pill recipe, snow gall flower, young locking grass, 7-leaf lotus, were all common spiritual plants. Only purple ganoderma and green fern that were more than 500 years old were difficult to find. After studying it for a while, she realized that this constitution-enhancing pill wasn't as easy to obtain as she imagined. 2 500-year-old spiritual plants weren't that easy to find. Moreover, the probability of failure in concocting the pill. Normally, she definitely couldn't afford it. However, it was definitely necessary when she was trying to break through a bottleneck or make a realm breakthrough. Thinking up to this point made her happy again. Although her cultivation speed wasn't fast, she could still maintain the standard of 3 spiritual roots. The difficult part was making a realm breakthrough. Taking the current situation as an example, wasn't this medicinal pill just right for her to build her foundation? In that case, when she returned, she would discuss with second uncle whether she wanted to learn pill concocting or not. With this constitution-enhancing pill, she would have a higher chance of building her foundation. With this thought in mind, she put away the jade slip and simply sat down to meditate. Because of the change in the spiritual aura inside her body, she didn't dare to continue cultivating. However, her dantian and meridians were still the same as before. That cold spiritual aura didn't have any effect on them, which made her feel slightly relieved. Soon she entered a meditative state. She felt as if she had melted into heaven and earth. There were no emotions, no thoughts, no joy, anger, sorrow, or joy. Even her body seemed to have ceased to exist. The only thing left behind was her slow and rhythmic breathing. It was as if she was a feather fluttering in the air, but it was also as if she had become one with heaven and earth until she couldn't even feel time. By the time she woke up from her meditative state, it was already daytime. She stood up and straightened her clothes, then used the light body technique to rush towards the market square. Of course, she took a big detour along the way so that no one would notice where she came from. Before long, she returned to the inn. A waiter came to greet her. "Master Immortal, you're finally back. There's a guest looking for you." Emo Chinga thought for a moment. It was probably Tian Xiao. They made an appointment yesterday, so she asked, "Where is she?" The waiter eagerly led the way. "She's waiting here. It's a young lady. This way, please." The waiter led Emo Chinga upstairs and lifted the curtain of the private room. Sure enough, it was Tian Xiao. Tian Xiao was sitting alone by the window. Upon seeing Emo Chinga coming in, she smiled. Emo Chinga also smiled back. Upon seeing the waiter's strange gaze, she suddenly felt a bit helpless. She was wearing men's clothes while Tian Xiao was dressed like a married woman. They didn't look like husband and wife. This waiter was probably guessing their relationship. Emo Chinga took out a piece of gold and threw it to the waiter. "Thank you." This piece of gold weighed no less than 2 taels. The waiter immediately smiled and nodded repeatedly. "It's nothing. Is there anything else, young master? Please tell me." Emo Chinga shook her head. "There's nothing else. You can go." The waiter nodded and bowed before reluctantly leaving. Once the waiter left, Tian Xiao looked at Emo Chinga with a smile. "You're really generous. You can casually give out gold." Emo Chinga smiled. "How could I be generous? It's just that for cultivators, gold and silver are no different from mud and stones. Let's go to my room." Tian Xiao nodded, then followed Emo Chinga all the way to the backyard. It wasn't until they entered the room that Tian Xiao cautiously said, "I still have to thank you for yesterday's medicinal pills." Emo Chinga shook her head. "I already thanked you yesterday. Why are you still being so polite to me?" "It's not that I'm being polite. Yesterday, my husband told me that the medicinal pills you gave me were aura-converging pills. Each bottle is worth no less than 200 spirit stones. We opened this small shop and we only earn this much in a year. It's really too precious. Seeing how persistent Tianxiao was, Mo Chenga had no choice but to say, "All right, I'll accept your thanks." In fact, if it was several months ago, I definitely wouldn't have been willing to sell them. However, I've already reached the peak stage of the aura refining realm, so these aura refining medicinal pills are no longer of any use to me. You don't need to worry too much about it. Tianxiao couldn't help but laugh. Just now you said you weren't generous, but now you don't even take a few hundred spirit stones seriously. If you keep saying that, you'll have to be careful of me knocking you from time to time. Mo Chenga was stunned. The two of them smiled at each other and tacitly stopped talking about it. Right, I prepared something for you. Tianxiao lifted the bundle in her hands. What is it? Tianxiao smiled mysteriously but didn't answer. Instead, she just opened the bundle. Inside the bundle were a comb, a mirror, various hairpins and other miscellaneous items. Mo Chenga was puzzled. This is... Tianxiao pulled her up and pushed her to the table. While propping up the mirror, she said with a smile, "Didn't you say you've been dressing as a man for 10 years? I think you must have forgotten how to dress up. Before, you always helped me, so let me help you this time." Sit properly. Tianxiao let go of Mo Chenga's hair and exclaimed in admiration, "You cultivators are good like this. You don't need to take care of yourself. Look at your hair. I'm sure you've never taken care of it, but it's so soft and smooth." Mo Chenga also smiled. "You're also a natural beauty. Why do you have to talk about me? Even if I'm a natural beauty, I still have to dress up. Mortals can't compare to cultivators. Why don't you think about it? Are there ugly women among cultivators? Every one of them is as beautiful as a flower. Just you wait, I guarantee you'll stare at yourself until you're stupefied." Tianxiao quickly combed Mo Chenga's hair and began to tie it up. A moment later, Mo Chenga stared at her reflection in the mirror. Sure enough, she was in a daze. The face in the mirror had beautiful eyebrows and eyes. It had a gentleness that men didn't have, but it also had a heroic spirit that women lacked. The combination of these two made her look even more beautiful and bright. Tianxiao moved closer with satisfaction. She looked at the two similar faces in the mirror and said, "Ever since I was a child, I've always thought you looked better than me. Look at how beautiful you look." Mo Chenga shook her head. "I feel really strange." "Don't." Tianxiao hastily stopped Mo Chenga's hand from wiping her face. She said in confusion, "I'm the one who feels strange. Why do you have to dress as a man? I've been in Kunwo for 2 or 3 years now, and there are many female cultivators here. Although they indeed can't compare to male cultivators, cultivators respect the strong. No one would dare to bully a powerful female cultivator." This question made Mo Chenga smile bitterly. "But right now I'm still far from being powerful. There are so many high-level male cultivators. If there were 1 or 2, I don't want to be a concubine or a human furnace." Tianxiao said, "I understand what you mean, but high-level cultivators rarely appear in the outside world. You also have a school to back you up, so there shouldn't be anyone who would dare to rob you, right? Furthermore, my husband once said that although cultivators can't truly purify their hearts and reduce their desires, they'll still try their best to suppress their desires in the secular world. Only those who are lecherous and have power would want concubines. As for human furnaces, in the righteous path, anyone who uses human furnaces to cultivate is looked down upon, so there aren't many people who want human furnaces." Mo Chenga naturally understood these principles better than Tianxiao, but, she sighed and said, "Then do you know about dual cultivation?" Tianxiao nodded. However, Mo Chenga heard Mo Chenga say, "Although dual cultivation is beneficial to both of us, I don't want to lose my own choice." She hesitated for a moment before continuing, "Besides, other people only look down upon those who use human furnaces because they don't have much use for them. If there are enough benefits, they wouldn't care about being looked down upon." Tianxiao heard the hidden meaning behind Mo Chenga's words. "You're saying..." Mo Chenga was somewhat hesitant. Second uncle said that this matter must never be known by anyone else but Tianxiao. She said, "My constitution is special. Reportedly, it's very suitable for dual cultivation or human furnaces, so it's fine if you hear about this, but you can't even tell your husband. If other people find out, it'll be a huge disaster for me." Mo Chenga's emphasis shocked Tianxiao. "Is that serious?" Mo Chenga nodded cautiously. Mo Chenga was willing to tell Tianxiao because their friendship wasn't ordinary, so she believed Tianxiao wouldn't divulge it. Secondly, Tianxiao didn't have much contact with cultivators. Meng Sigue was the only one she didn't care about. Furthermore, the two of them didn't know which cultivation group she was in. The name Yi Xiaotian alone was too common. Even if it was leaked, they wouldn't be able to find it in a short time. Moreover, she had long prepared to leave Yunwu sect after building her foundation. Chapter 79. After staying in the market square for a few days, Mo Qingge left. Although she recognized Tianxiao, they walked different paths after all. Tianxiao wouldn't leave her husband, and she didn't have the ability to protect them, so it was better for them to go their separate ways. Except for the first day, Mo Qingge didn't see Meng Sigue again. However, she gave several bottles of aura-nourishing pills and some cultivation notes to Tianxiao before leaving. Tianxiao didn't have spiritual roots, so she couldn't make Tianxiao a cultivator. She just hoped that Meng Sigue would treat Tianxiao better in the future because of these medicinal pills or because he was afraid of her cultivation level. After flying north for several days, she finally arrived at the gate of Tiandao sect. Among the 7 great cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole, except for Zhengfa School, which was located in the northernmost glacier area, the other 6 were in Kunwu. The 2 largest cultivation groups, Tiandao sect and Shenqing School, were located in the east and west. Tiandao sect was located in the northeast of Kunwu, separated from the Devil Path by a mountain. According to rumors in the Celestial Pole, the founder of Tiandao sect was a genius. 10,000 years ago, during the war between the righteous and the Devil Path, his name shook the world. Later, he led his disciples to establish a sect here. It was said that the reason he chose this place as the gate was not only to block the Devil Path's path to Kunwu, but also to train his disciples' combat ability. As it turned out, the founder of Tiandao sect indeed had a unique view. Not only did Tiandao sect's disciples not wear down the sect's strength because of the war with the Devil Path, but they also grew rapidly during the war. In fact, this phenomenon wasn't unique to Tiandao sect. Shenqing School and Gujin sect, whose strength was second only to Tiandao sect, both pursued the strategy of live in hardship and die in peace. However, their enemies weren't the Devil Path, but the demonic beasts in the surroundings. When she arrived at Mount Yuheng, where Tiandao sect was located, Mo Qingge saw Demonic Mountain from afar. Demonic Mountain was a snowy mountain tens of thousands of feet high. It was connected to Mount Yuheng, but it was more than twice as tall. At the foot of the mountain was a lush green forest. Halfway up the mountain was a layer of white. At first glance, it was pure white, towering into the clouds. It was said that Demonic Mountain was also the highest mountain in Kunwu. When Mo Qingge saw Demonic Mountain for the first time, she, like many people, sighed with emotion. The reputation of the highest mountain in Kunwu was well deserved. But at the same time she had a complicated feeling. This was the place where her father died. As for her father, whom she had never met, she still had feelings of admiration for him. When he was a child, his mother always said that his father was a very gentle person, and when the other villagers mentioned his father, they would always praise him for being very capable. Later, when they arrived in Kunwu, Yi Jingwen said his father was very famous in West Kunwu, and second uncle respected and loved his father even more. Therefore, in her heart, her father was a successful cultivator, as well as a competent elder brother and husband. Sometimes she couldn't help but think that if her father was still alive, would she not have to suffer all these years? But every time she thought of this, she would warn herself not to be too greedy. Second uncle had already been good enough to her. He had taken on the responsibility of a parent and raised her. In order for her to cultivate in peace, he had worked hard to earn spirit stones. For her safety, he had taken her to wander around. It could be said that in these 10 years, second uncle had lived for her. What did she have to complain about? The small town at the foot of Mount Yuheng had gathered countless cultivators because of the Tiandao sect's illustrious reputation. The streets were neat, the shops were luxurious, and countless cultivators were shuttling back and forth at the foot of the mountain. Most of these cultivators were aura refining cultivators, but there were also many foundation building cultivators. Occasionally she could even see 1 or 2 core formation cultivators. This was an eye-opener for Mo Qingge. Sure enough, Tiandao sect wasn't an ordinary cultivation group. Compared to it, Yunwu sect was simply a rural place. Fellow Taoist, wait. She was strolling on the street when she suddenly heard a voice behind her. Then it seemed like someone was rushing towards her. She stepped aside and dodged. Aya. The person fell to the ground. It was a very ordinary-looking teenager. His appearance was ordinary, his clothes were ordinary, and his cultivation level was only in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm. There was almost nothing special about him. The teenager crawled up, ignoring her vigilant expression, and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist, you have a fast reaction. Mo Chinga glanced at him and discreetly put some distance between them. She said faintly, "What's the matter?" Her attitude was cold, but the teenager didn't care at all. He still said with a smile, "I'm He Bishing. I don't need fellow Taoist's name." Mo Chinga frowned slightly and answered, "My surname is Yi. Fellow Taoist, what can I do for you?" "Oh, turns out it's fellow Taoist Yi. I don't dare to hope for you, but it seems you're also here to participate in the Immortals Assembly, right?" "Me too, and so are many of my friends. Since we all have the same goal, why don't we get together and talk about our experiences?" The words of the teenager who called himself He Bishing made Mo Chinga speechless. She hadn't said anything yet, but this person was really talking to himself. However, he mentioned the Immortals Assembly. Did Tiandao sect happen to be holding an Immortals Assembly? No wonder there were so many people here. "Fellow Taoist Yi, let's go together. It's better to make a last-minute effort than not, right? If we miss this opportunity, we'll have to wait for another 10 years. Although our cultivation levels aren't high, we might have a better chance if we communicate with each other." Although the teenager looked sincere, Mo Chinga wasn't moved in the slightest. She only said, "Thank you for your kindness, but there's no need. I want it. The teenager didn't seem to notice her refusal and was still very enthusiastic. "Fellow Taoist, you don't have to be so polite. We're all individual cultivators, so communicating with each other is better than nothing. Come, let's go this way." He was about to lead the way, but after taking 2 steps, he turned around and stared at her anxiously. Mo Chinga felt helpless. After thinking that she really didn't have any plans, she shook her head and followed him. Seeing that she was willing to follow him, the teenager smiled even more happily. He led her left and right, talking endlessly as they walked. "Fellow Taoist Yi, you seem to be about the same age as me, but your cultivation level is actually in the 10th layer. That's really amazing. Could it be that you're a disciple of a cultivation clan?" Mo Chinga shook her head. "I'm not. In fact, she should be 3 or 4 years older than this teenager. It was just that she was small, so people always mistook her for a man." "Ah, that's even more amazing," the teenager said enviously. "Fellow Taoist, ye must have outstanding talents, so you might be able to enter Tiandao sect without having to take the test." Mo Chinga didn't answer. She was now 20 years old, but her cultivation level was already in the peak stage of the aura refining realm. Even among the elite disciples of big cultivation groups, her cultivation level wasn't bad. However, she clearly knew that her fast cultivation wasn't because of talents, but because of medicinal pills. If it wasn't for Second Uncle's full support and the many rewards she received from Yunwu sect, it would be considered good if she could have the same cultivation level as this teenager. "Fellow Taoist Yi, I have 2 friends who are also participating in the Immortals Assembly. Their cultivation levels are a bit higher than mine. The 3 of us usually only cultivate hard and rarely communicate with others. We're also not proficient in fights of magical powers. Now that the Immortals Assembly is about to begin, we need to have some means to survive, not to mention winning. We have no other choice, so we want to communicate with others and make more preparations. In any case, we can't lose our lives." The teenager chattered endlessly. Mo Chinga didn't know what he was saying until the end. Soon the topic was diverted to who knows where, but the teenager never stopped talking. "Ah, we're here." Finally, the teenager stopped in front of an ordinary door and knocked on it. Mo Chinga heaved a sigh of relief. Although she pretended she didn't hear anything, it was still quite annoying to have someone talking next to her. Soon the door opened. A tall teenager stood behind the door. Upon seeing this person, the teenager promptly said, "Big Brother Huang, I brought a guest." When the teenager saw Mo Chinga standing behind him, he also smiled. "Fellow Taoist, welcome. Come in quickly." After she stepped through the door, she saw that it looked like an ordinary house with a small courtyard and a person was sitting in the hall. The door behind her closed with a bang and the teenager said, "Fellow Taoist, please come in." When Mo Chinga walked into the hall, the slightly chubby teenager also stood up. "Fellow Taoist," the teenager took a step forward and introduced her. "Fellow Taoist Yi, this is my big brother. His name is Hibishio. Big brother, this is fellow Taoist Yi I met today. He's about the same age as me, but his cultivation level is already in the 10th layer. He's really amazing." The teenager called Hibishio was slightly surprised. "So it's fellow Taoist Yi. Second brother, you're pretty good today. You actually brought back a 10th layer fellow Taoist." "Of course." The teenager smiled proudly and politely welcomed her. "Fellow Taoist Yi, please sit and have a cup of tea first. Big brother Huang, come quickly." I'm coming. The teenager surnamed Huang hastily walked into the room. Mo Chinga sat on the guest seat and took the spiritual tea the teenager handed her. She slowly blew on the tea and took a sip. She thought that this teenager's big brother, Hibishio, and the teenager surnamed Huang were both in the 9th layer, so they seemed to have put in a lot of effort. If she had enough spirit stones as her backing, she should have a high chance of winning the Immortals Assembly. When she put down the teacup, the 3 people in front of her became even happier. Mo Chinga calmly looked at the door then asked, "Fellow Taoists, why are you so happy?" The 3 people who were staring at her and laughing didn't stop. No one answered her question. The 3 of them glanced at each other, then the teenager said, Big brother Huang, are you satisfied with today's goods?" Hibishio nodded repeatedly. "Not bad. Not only is this boy's cultivation level high, but his skin is also soft and tender. Later, if he's sold to a high-level female cultivator or a lecherous cultivator, we'll definitely be able to sell him for a lot of money." As they spoke, the 3 people once again laughed at each other. Their laughter was extremely vulgar. Mo Chinga wrinkled her brows. "Fellow Taoists, what are you talking about?" Still, no one answered her question. The teenager surnamed Huang also said, "Yes. Since this boy has such a high cultivation level at such a young age, his family must also be very wealthy. I say, Bishing, are you sure he's not someone from a cultivation clan?" "I'm sure he isn't," Bishing said. "Look at his ordinary clothes. Moreover, do you think those young masters from cultivation clans would be as calm as him?" "If you put it that way, that's true." The teenager surnamed Huang nodded. "It'd be great if you could find this kind of goods every time." His words made Bishing very unconvinced. "Big brother Huang, this isn't just about me. Why are you only talking about me?" The teenager surnamed Huang said boldly, "Aren't you responsible for getting the bait? Look at what kind of goods you brought a few days ago. They don't have many spirit stones on them, and even their spirit tools are very rotten. Can you blame me for that? Although there are people everywhere, not everyone is willing to come with me. Isn't that because you're not capable enough?" Enough? Seeing that Bishing and the teenager surnamed Huang were about to quarrel, Hibishio shouted at them to stop. "The 2 of you should also look at the time. Hurry up and get to work first." The 2 of them reluctantly glared at each other, then took out their respective spirit tools. Mo Chinga stared at them and said, "Fellow Taoists, haha." Upon seeing her like this, Bishing laughed and finally spoke to her. "Fellow Taoist Yi, could it be that none of your elders taught you that people's hearts are sinister and that you shouldn't casually follow strangers?" Mo Chinga swept her gaze over the 3 of them. Instead of answering, she directly asked, "What do you want to do?" Hibishio rolled up his sleeves and said, "Don't be anxious. You'll know soon enough." Chapter 80. Mo Chinga slowly took another sip of tea and said, Hibishio. What good names. Why were you born? Why did you cultivate? Your parents were really smart." Hibishio, who didn't understand the meaning behind her words, grinned nastily and said, "This sentence is used on you. You should regret meeting us. Why did your parents give birth to you? Why did they have to walk on the path of cultivation?" Mo Chinga didn't move, but the corners of her mouth curled up behind the teacup. The 3 of them glanced at each other, then took out their spirit tools and pounced on her. At that moment, Mo Chinga stuck a talisman on her body. In the blink of an eye, she was behind the 3 of them. With a wave of her hand, numerous transparent flying needles shot out from between her fingers. The 3 of them were shocked and hastily dodged, but she was too fast. Each of them was more or less pierced by a few needles. Among them, Bishing was the most miserable. His cultivation level was the weakest, so he realized it too late. The moment he turned around, the flying needles shot right at his chest. He simply didn't have enough time to react. These needles were as fine as cow hair. As soon as the 3 of them touched them, they immediately felt pain and itch where they were pierced. They turned pale with fright. Bishing's vitals were pierced, so his body went limp and he fell to the ground. This opportunity couldn't be missed. Mo Chinga once again waved her hand, causing them to dodge in fear. However, this time the flying needles flew in another direction. In an instant, several hidden formation discs and formation flags in the corners of the room were either destroyed or collapsed. Realizing they were tricked, the other 2 were flustered and exasperated. As soon as they regained their footing, they swung their spirit tools. Mo Chinga's figure was like a ghost. A sword suddenly appeared in her hand and blocked the attack. Soon after, she shook her arms and threw out both spirit tools. The two of them hastily tried to retrieve their spirit tools, but at that moment she waved her hand again. The three of them couldn't clearly see what she threw out, but they saw thorns growing from the ground and surrounding them. In just a few breaths, the three of them were like fish on a chopping board. Mo Chinga clapped her hands and sat back in her original position. The three people in the room were entangled in the thorns, wailing incessantly. At that moment, the three of them finally felt afraid. The youth surnamed Huang and He Bishing saw that their opponent was terrifyingly fast and their spirit tools were completely useless in front of her, making them break out in cold sweat. He Bishing anxiously called out, "Dage he." Ibishio didn't have time to pay attention to him. He shouted at Mo Chinga, "You? Could it be that you've been hiding your cultivation level?" Among individual cultivators, the three of them could be considered to have high cultivation levels. With the three of them working together, when had they ever been in such a difficult situation? Mo Chinga simply smiled and said coldly, "Short-sighted. Why do you need to hide your cultivation?" The strength of a battle of magical powers didn't just depend on one's cultivation level. These three people wanted to trick a newbie to rob them, but they didn't think about it. If they didn't have a clan, how could a cultivator who had cultivated to the 10th layer of aura refining still be a newbie? Mo Chinga had followed second uncle to wander around, so she'd seen fights of magical powers between foundation-building cultivators many times. She also experienced several life-threatening situations in Yunwu sect. People like them, who only dared to make a move after setting up a formation and using bewitching powder, had poor vigilance and slow reactions. They were much worse than the disciples of the three cultivation groups. How could they possibly be her match? Mo Chinga already felt strange being pestered by that youngster on the street. However, she'd experienced many fights now, so she was naturally more courageous. With just one look at his clumsy technique, she knew the other party was mediocre. In any case, since she was idle and bored, she might as well take a look. It would be best if nothing happened, but if the other party really had bad intentions, she'd just rob him instead. She just happened to need money for the pill recipe for the constitution-enhancing pill, so robbing was the fastest way to get it. However, she couldn't do this kind of thing. Now that someone was trying to deceive her, how could she just let him go? When she got closer, she discovered traces of a formation inside the room. She became even more certain that this was just a small scorching sun formation, so she didn't care about it at all. You. The youngster surnamed Huang said in astonishment, "You obviously drank some tea, so how could—" Mo Chinga raised the cup and took another sip. "Are you talking about this bewitching powder? One refreshing pill is enough." The main ingredient of bewitching powder was the fragrant jade flower. In the secular world, she was easily knocked out by someone using the fragrant jade flower. Later on, she put in some effort, so how could she not recognize it? Only now did the three of them realize that someone was pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. The youngster surnamed Huang looked at He Bishing, who was lying on the ground, and cursed, "It's all your fault. What kind of eyes do you have? This time we're going to die because of you." He Bishing was injured, so he couldn't speak properly. He anxiously said, "You? How could you blame me? If I don't blame you, who should I blame?" The man sneered. "You're the one who brought them back." He Bishing was so angry that his face turned red, but his injuries were the heaviest. He was so angry that he couldn't even speak. "You?" Seeing his brother like this, He Bishio angrily said, "Huang Weiren, normally when my second brother brought people here, you always took advantage of them. You're blaming him for not doing his job, but why didn't you go yourself?" Mo Chinga couldn't help but want to laugh when she heard this name. Huang Weiren. What a waste of a human. These three names really matched each other. Huang Weiren still grumbled to himself, "How could I know he was stupid to this extent? Didn't you also not see it yourself?" That's because I trusted him." Mo Chinga didn't know whether to laugh or cry. These three people must have problems with their brains. They were still quarreling at a time like this. This made her feel very unfulfilled. She knocked on the table and said, "Are you guys done quarreling?" The two of them immediately reacted and stopped quarreling. Ibishio stared at Hibishing, who was lying on the ground and couldn't move. He struggled for a while, then begged, "Fellow Taoist Yi, Senior Yi, we had eyes but couldn't see that you were an expert. Please forgive us." Huang Weiren also said, Yes. It's all our fault for being blind. We actually couldn't see that you were an expert. Please be magnanimous and don't bother with us." Mo Chinga glanced at them but didn't say anything. It was only when the three of them were scared that she finally said slowly, "Let you guys go? Alright, let's talk first. How many people have you deceived? How did you deceive them?" The three of them were delighted. Ibishio and Huang Weiren also stopped quarreling. They looked at each other and pushed each other back and forth. You tell me. You tell me. I don't remember clearly. I don't know how to talk. The two of them pushed each other back and forth for a while. In the end, it was Huang Weiren who said, "The three of us are individual cultivators living in the vicinity of Tiandao sect. We don't have any other skills and really can't afford to cultivate, so we thought of this method. There are a lot of foreign cultivators in Tiandao sect. Some of them admire the reputation of the #1 cultivation group in Kunwu, and some of them come to the market square to buy things. We thought that with so many foreign cultivators unattended, no one would find out if we deceived one or two of them, so we started this business without any capital. Your cultivation levels aren't low now, so you've been deceiving us for a long time? Didn't you run into any trouble with your meager tricks?" Huang Weiren said, "We did run into some trouble, but we've always been very careful. We didn't provoke people from Tiandao sect or people from cultivation clans. We only looked for some foreign individual cultivators. These people generally don't have much influence. There were a few powerful ones, but when we used formations and bewitching powder together, only a few of them could survive. This was reasonable. If she wasn't proficient in formations and couldn't recognize bewitching powder, she might have already fallen into their trap. With your clumsy deceit skills, some people actually fell for it?" Upon hearing what Mo Tiange said, the three people present all had bitter expressions on their faces. Ibishio said, "We're also good at judging people. Some of the foreign cultivators came to Tiandao sect to exchange ideas with fellow Taoists, so we pretended to be Tiandao sect cultivators. Some of them came to buy things, so we pretended to have top-grade materials in our hands but didn't know what they were. Oh? Wasn't this very stupid? Recently, because Tiandao sect was going to hold an Immortals Assembly, many cultivators came. Most of them were country bumpkins who'd never seen the world, so Mo Chinga understood what he meant. There were many cultivators who'd come, and there were also many who'd never seen the world, so it was naturally easy to deceive them. Furthermore, the Immortals Assembly was more chaotic than usual, so no one paid attention to it. Those guys were so pleased with themselves that they forgot themselves. Seeing that she was young and had a high cultivation level, they thought she was a country bumpkin, so they couldn't wait to take advantage of her. In that case, you must have robbed a lot of things during this time." Huang Weiren looked at her with fear. "In fact, it wasn't much," Mo Tiange smiled. "Not much? Then hand them all over. If you hand them over, I'll spare your lives." "Ha! It's fine if you don't want to hand them over. After I kill you, I'll take my time searching." Seeing the three of them struggling, her somewhat gloomy mood instantly improved. Using other people's bad luck to comfort herself was indeed very effective. "Big brother," Hibishing, who was lying on the ground, said with a sullen face, I don't want to die yet." Ibishio and Huang Weiren both had struggling expressions on their faces. The two of them communicated with their eyes. Upon seeing this, Mo Chinga chuckled softly and pressed her palm down. In an instant, all the flying needles flew back to her hand, including the ones on their bodies. Ibishio and Huang Weiren were in a better condition, but Hibishing had a lot of flying needles stuck in his body. Now that the needles came out from his wounds, he immediately howled in pain. Big brother, give them to him." Upon seeing his miserable state, Hibishio hastily shouted, "Okay, we'll give all our things to you." Mo Chinga showed a faint smile. "Throw me your Chinkuan bags." Although Hibishing was injured, he was still the most afraid. Trembling, he immediately threw his Chinkuan bag to her. Upon seeing this, Hibishio also clenched his teeth and took out his Chinkuan bag. Huang Weiren was very unwilling, but the other two people kept staring at him. After staring for a long time, he finally made up his mind and threw his Chinkuan bag. Mo Chinga caught the 3 Chinkuan bags, opened them and looked inside before casually stuffing them into her robe. She smiled at the 3 swindlers and robbers who were staring at her anxiously. She then took out a talisman from her Chinkuan bag and threw it at them. Boom! The entire hall was surrounded by raging flames. The 3 people shouted one after another, "You didn't keep your word. Didn't you say you wouldn't kill us?" Mo Chinga turned around and walked outside. She waved her hand and said, "You didn't hand over all your belongings, so of course you can't buy your lives back. I'll just take back half of your lives." After leaving the residence, she got her bearings and leisurely walked towards the street. These 3 people obviously didn't hand over all their belongings. However, she wasn't a professional robber, so she didn't bother to care about this. Although she wouldn't kill them, she still taught them a lesson to vent her anger. The fire just now was enough to make them half dead. She walked on the street with a smile on her face. One escape talisman and one fire talisman earned her several hundred spirit stones. This business was really good. Chapter 81. After dealing with the 3 unlucky people, Mo Chenga found a place to rest. Sure enough, it was the Immortals' Assembly. The streets were full of people and several inns were all full. Mo Chenga had no choice but to spend a bit more money to rent a hut from Tiandao sect. Soon after, she went to a shop belonging to Tiandao sect, a medicinal hall called 100 Herbs Hall. The Immortals' Assembly was approaching, so the medicinal hall was crowded with people buying all kinds of medicinal pills. There was only one corner that was empty. An old man in the second layer of the aura refining realm wearing the uniform of a part-time disciple of Wuxia sect was dozing off. Mo Chenga looked at the counter. It was the corner responsible for buying and selling spiritual plants, so she walked over and knocked on the counter. The old man guarding the counter opened his eyes, looked at her and said lazily, "Buy or sell?" Her attitude was really cold. She recalled that when she hadn't entered Yunwu sect and her cultivation level was still very ordinary, the shop assistants in Yunwu sect's shops also treated her politely. As the #1 cultivation group in Kunwu, Tiandao sect's part-time disciples were actually this arrogant. However, she was too lazy to care about this and just said, "I want to buy some spiritual plants for pill concocting." The old man glanced at her. He probably thought she was a concocting master, so he asked, "Type and quantity?" Mo Chenga said, "What's the price of the materials needed for primary medicinal pills?" Oh. This sound was different from the previous one. The old man's eyes lit up. He stared at her and said, "Fellow Taoist, are you a beginner in pill concocting?" Mo Chenga nodded. There were many people who couldn't concoct medicinal pills, but there were also many people who wanted to learn pill concocting, so there was nothing to hide. The old man said, "I also have a few common pill recipes. Do you want them?" Mo Chenga originally planned to buy some pill recipes after buying them. Since he took the initiative to ask, she said, "If fellow Taoist has them, I'm willing to buy them." Upon hearing this, the old man changed his cold attitude and said with a smile, "Of course I do. I have aura-nourishing pills, restorative panaceas, spirit-purifying pills, refreshing pills and so on. If fellow Taoist wants them, I can sell them to you at a lower price. How about 3 spirit stones each?" These pills were the most common pills in the Taoism world. Pill recipes could be found everywhere and were not rare. Therefore their prices were very low. However, this low price was only relative to other pill recipes that could easily cost hundreds of spirit stones. 3 spirit stones wasn't a small amount for ordinary cultivation group disciples. The group only distributed about 5 spirit stones a month. Even if they worked hard to earn money, they would probably only get a dozen or so spirit stones, let alone individual cultivators. Therefore, after the old man finished speaking, he stared at Mo Chenga's face. Seeing that she didn't answer immediately, the old man said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist, this isn't the shop's price. If you go elsewhere to buy it, it'll usually cost around 5 spirit stones. You won't be able to get it this cheap." Mo Chenga was silent for a while because she was used to it. She wasn't rich and overbearing, so when she bought things she would naturally save as much as possible. Because of that, she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she thought about it for a while. Now that she heard the old man's meaning, she finally understood. This old man was selling it privately, and the spirit stones went into his own pocket. That was why he looked like this. Being stared at by her, the old man didn't feel embarrassed at all. He just smiled. Mo Chenga muttered to herself for a while, then said, "All right. Bring me the pill recipes. I'll choose a few and you can prepare the materials for me." The old man smiled, then took out a piece of animal skin paper and handed it to her. Mo Chenga chose 3 or 4 pill recipes from it. The old man glanced at them, then asked, "Fellow Taoist, how many sets of materials do you need?" Mo Chenga thought for a while, then said, 100 sets of each. In addition, I'll add the materials for aura-nourishing pills, marrow-supplementing pills and unity divinity pills. 100 sets of each. 100 sets of materials was already a lot. The old man was a bit surprised, but he didn't say anything. He turned around, took the animal skin paper from the counter, and wrapped the spiritual plants one by one from the medicine cabinet in the back. There were also several kinds that needed to be kept fresh, so he directly took them out along with the jade boxes. "These are the materials for 100 sets of medicinal pill recipes. Please take care of them." The counter was full of materials and there were several jade slips on top of the jade boxes. Mo Chenga checked them. After confirming that they were indeed pill recipes, she asked, How many spirit stones do they cost? The old man's eyes shone brightly as he looked around. When he saw that no one was paying attention to them, he said, "As for these materials, since you're buying so many, I'll give them a bit cheaper. 150 spirit stones. 3 sets of pill recipes cost 9 spirit stones, so the total is 159 spirit stones." Emo Chenga nodded. She took out spirit stones from her Chengkuan bag, counted them several times and handed them over. Being a bit cautious also showed that this was already a lot of money for her, so she didn't want other people to be greedy. This place wasn't like Yunwu sect. With second uncle here, she didn't need to worry about other people getting jealous when she spent several hundred spirit stones because it was normal for foundation building cultivators to spend several hundred spirit stones. The old man took them with a smile. "Thank you for your patronage." He earned 9 spirit stones for free, so this wasn't a small business. After putting all the materials into her Chengkuan bag, Emo Chenga asked, "May I know if there are any pill furnaces for sale here?" Upon hearing this question, the old man once again showed a sincere smile. "Fellow Taoist, you're really asking the right question. I'll sell you some pill furnaces. Although they're not high-quality ones, they're enough for beginners. Of course, if you want to buy a high-grade pill furnace, please come to our Tiandao sect's Hall of 10,000 Tools. It's just next door." Emo Chenga said, "I'm just a beginner, so I don't need a high-grade pill furnace. Let me see what kind of pill furnaces you have." The old man nodded repeatedly. He took several pill furnaces from under the counter and placed them on the counter. "Please take a look." The smallest of these pill furnaces was a square foot, while the largest was a full 3 feet tall. Emo Chenga recalled Qinshi's pill furnace she saw before. It seemed to be a foot tall, but it was full of spiritual aura. Presumably, its size shouldn't have anything to do with the finished product, so she randomly picked a small one. "How many spirit stones?" "All of them have the same price, 15 spirit stones." Emo Chenga nodded. She counted out 15 spirit stones and put the pill furnace into her Chengkuan bag. The two of them were very satisfied with the transaction. Emo Chenga left 100 Herbs Hall amidst the old man's "welcome again." She didn't know why, but when she heard the old man's voice, she felt it was very similar to the courteous tone of a brothel keeper in the secular world when she saw off a guest. She couldn't help but get goosebumps. After returning to the small house she temporarily lived in, Emo Chenga laid a formation, then took out the pill furnaces she bought, cleaned them and placed them in front of her. She then took out several books and started to read. Second uncle said that for generations, almost no one in Yi clan learned pill concocting. There were only a few concoctions masters, but that was a long time ago. Therefore there weren't many materials on pill concocting. The few that remained were also lost when Yi clan moved out of Mount Qingmeng. Fortunately, several years ago in Miwu Valley she obtained several books. One of them was about pill concocting. The other books were good, so this one shouldn't be bad either. Thus she took it out and compared it. The most basic medicinal pills in the aura refining realm were aura nourishing pills, so she naturally had to start concocting them. First, she picked up all kinds of materials and reviewed the precautions, the real fire for pill concocting, and the use of various hand seals. Only after she confirmed that she understood everything did she put down the book. She sat cross-legged on the praying mat and condensed her aura in her dantian. After a while, a wisp of spiritual aura naturally sprang out from her palm and instantly turned into a fiery red flame. Emo Chenga smiled when she saw the flame in her palm. This was dantian fire. Even if she didn't have fire spiritual roots, she could still release it. However, the quality of fire spiritual roots would increase the power of dantian fire. Although her spiritual roots weren't good, it was in the sense of the number of spiritual roots she had. Second uncle had tested her before, and just by looking at the pros and cons of each spiritual root, they were all pretty good. That was why she was able to force out the dantian fire so easily. She guided the spiritual aura in her hand, and the dantian fire turned into a long line. It reached the bottom of the pill furnace and quickly covered it. Soon the pill furnace was heated up. Her free hand flicked out a wisp of spiritual aura and opened the furnace lid. She quickly threw all kinds of ingredients inside and closed the lid again. In addition, she also sent a strand of divine sense into the furnace to carefully sense the fusion of these materials. The heat of dantian fire was much higher than that of ordinary flames. Soon the materials inside melted. At that moment, a muffled pop came from inside the furnace. Emo Chenga stopped the dantian fire, opened the lid, and stared at the materials inside the furnace gloomily. Most of these materials had melted, but they weren't perfectly mixed together. Instead, they turned into a pool of black water that sizzled and steamed. Mo Chenga heaved a sigh. She threw away all the failed concocting dregs and washed them with clear spring water before putting the pill furnace back on the table. Sure enough, concocting pills wasn't a simple matter. According to the book, although the quantity of various materials was roughly known, the fine details had to be learned by the concoction's master themselves. The reason why she failed in the smelting step was that she didn't have a sense of the medicinal pill's composition, so she couldn't grasp the quantity. She changed the materials and failed again, but a smile appeared on Mo Chenga's face. This time, when her divine sense entered the pill furnace, she could already sense the subtle sensations of the materials, so she washed the furnace again and continued to concoct pills. After quickly adding the materials, she used her divine sense to explore the furnace. She felt the materials inside were melting and fusing with each other. After a quarter of an hour, they finally turned into a complete medicinal liquid, and she could smell the rich fragrance of medicinal pills. After swallowing several restorative panaceas, Mo Chenga guided her spiritual aura into her dantian. An even fiercer dantian fire came out and covered the entire pill furnace. Under the high temperature, the medicinal liquid in the pill furnace began to boil and shrink little by little. Mo Chenga kept swallowing restorative panaceas to maintain the dantian fire. Now was the time to condense pills, so she needed to maintain a stable high-temperature fire. However, the spiritual aura of aura-refining cultivators was too weak, so she could only rely on restorative panaceas to maintain the dantian fire. She didn't know how much time had passed or how many restorative panaceas she ate, but finally the medicinal liquid in the pill furnace slowly shrunk into lumps, which then began to condense into pills. When the pills condensed, Mo Chenga happily stopped the dantian fire and opened the pill furnace. But in the next moment, her expression became extremely gloomy. The medicinal pill had already taken shape, but it exploded the moment she opened the furnace. She knew it was because she opened the furnace at the wrong time. Sure enough, concocting pills wasn't a simple matter. No wonder the book emphasized that only after opening the furnace dozens of times could one grasp the entire process of concocting medicinal pills. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a huge profit if she could make 1 or 2 spirit stones for each of the 7 or 8 kinds of medicinal pills with only 1 or 2 spirit stones for each of the medicinal pills she refined? Because the success rate was too low, being able to concoct 200 or 300 medicinal pills out of 700 or 800 materials was already considered very good. Coupled with other investments, the profit was really not much. Shaking her head, Mo Chenga once again dumped the medicinal dregs, cleaned the pill furnace and continued to concoct medicinal pills. Even if she didn't have talent, she would definitely succeed as long as she kept working hard. In any case, she had a lot of spirit stones now. When she ran out of spirit stones, she could consider giving up. Chapter 82. Several days later, Mo Chenga finished her pill concocting. Of course, she hadn't used up all of the 700 or 800 portions of medicinal pill materials. After hundreds of pill concocting experiments, she was able to grasp the whole process and made about 5 or 6 finished pills. Although the success rate of only 5% was low, considering she was a beginner, it was normal. Even if she was a great concocting master, her success rate was only 50 to 60%. Ordinary concoctions masters could only achieve a success rate of 30%. However, this result still made her depressed. No wonder Yi clan members weren't proficient in pill concocting. If this result was placed in a cultivation group, she would definitely be classified as someone without any talent. Since she knew her talent wasn't good, Mo Chenga didn't set a high goal. She only wanted to reach the level of 20 to 30% of ordinary concoctions masters. With her current basic understanding of pill concocting, she could probably reach a success rate of 30% after using up the 700 or 800 portions of materials. Then she could learn more difficult pill recipes. According to the pill recipe, this constitution-enhancing pill was a kind of medicinal pill that was quite difficult to concoct. The hand seals were complicated, and the control of the dantian real fire was also very subtle. It wasn't something that could be completed in a short time. After carefully calculating the cost, Mo Chenga realized she was still too optimistic. This time she only concocted the most common medicinal pills. She spent nearly 200 spirit stones just to familiarize herself with pill concocting. If she concocted more difficult pills, the remaining 3,000 spirit stones wouldn't be enough to buy the materials. Moreover, with her current success rate, selling the medicinal pills to buy materials for her to continue concocting pills was just a dream. In addition, the materials for the constitution-enhancing pill itself weren't cheap. The two 500-year-old purple Ganoderma and black fern probably cost more than 1,000 spirit stones. Even if she was lucky enough to use more than 3,000 spirit stones to practice pill concocting to the stage where she could concoct constitution-enhancing pills, she still wouldn't be able to afford the materials. After having a headache for a while, Emo Chinga suddenly realized something and couldn't help but laugh at herself for worrying too much. She had just started learning pill concocting. She didn't know how many years it would be before she could concoct constitution-enhancing pills. In any case, she didn't need to cultivate as hard as before. She could earn enough money in a few years. Besides, even if she obtained constitution-enhancing pills, she wasn't sure she could successfully build her foundation in one try. If she failed, she would have to compete for foundation-building pills 10 years later. If she failed, she would have to wait another 10 years. She was only 20 years old now, so she had more than 100 years to live. What was there to be afraid of? With this thought in mind, Emo Chinga managed to extricate herself from the endless pill concocting. There was less than half a month before the Immortals' assembly of the Tiandao sect. There were more and more people at the foot of the mountain. Luckily, she had rented a house a few days ago. Otherwise, she would have to sleep outside. Emo Chinga strolled along the street, watching the crowds of cultivators coming and going. Now that she had reached the peak stage of the aura refining realm, she had hopes of entering the foundation building realm, and she also had a lot of money. Everything was going according to her wishes. The only exception was second uncle's imminent death, but this was something she had absolutely no ability to change. The lifespan of a cultivator was related to their cultivation and maintenance. The most important factor was one's cultivation level. The higher one's cultivation level was, the longer one's lifespan would be. Advancing to the next realm would increase one's lifespan by at least 100 years. For example, the lifespan of an aura refining cultivator was between 100 to 200 years old. Cultivators below the fourth layer of the aura refining realm could only live up to what mortals call 100 years old. However, once they broke through to the fourth layer of the aura refining realm, they could live up to 150 years old. If their cultivation level was extremely profound and reached the peak of the aura refining realm, they could basically live up to 200 years old. However, if they advanced from the aura refining realm to the foundation building realm, they could live for at least 100 years. Second uncle was originally in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. If he took good care of himself, he could live for at least another 50 years. However, the injuries he suffered a few years ago were too severe. Now, second uncle was only about 300 years old, but his lifespan was already about to run out. Since he had no hope of advancing to the next realm, if she wanted second uncle to live, she had to take longevity pills. Each pill could increase his lifespan by 100 years. However, longevity pills hadn't appeared for several hundred years. Even if they did appear, countless nascent soul cultivators would fight for them. How could they have a chance? Emo Chinga smiled dejectedly, then followed the stream of people and walked up the mountain. They were just small cultivators. How could they have a share of those peerless spiritual pills? They could only accept this fate. Tiandao Sect's monastery was indeed worthy of its title as the #1 cultivation group in Kunwu. The entire monastery was carved from a huge piece of spirit jade. When the sunlight shone down, it reflected a 7-colored radiance. The light was flowing and overflowing, dazzling. There were also clouds floating and moving around the monastery, giving people a feeling that they were in a fairyland. Emo Chinga couldn't help but sigh. It was no wonder Tiandao Sect's symbol was an immortal gate and auspicious clouds. As long as you saw their monastery, it would be very difficult for you not to remember this scene. Since she wasn't a disciple of Tiandao Sect and the Immortals' assembly hadn't started yet, she naturally couldn't enter the monastery. Like all the other tourists, Emo Chinga took a turn then went back down the mountain. She didn't envy Tiandao Sect at all. Even if Yunwu Sect was much worse than Tiandao Sect, a cultivation group was still the same thing. It was just that Tiandao Sect's treatment was slightly better. Of course, she didn't ignore cultivation groups. Although she had long planned to leave Yunwu Sect, her ultimate goal was only to get rid of all this trouble. When the time came, she would still have to find a cultivation group to settle down in. For no other reason than to enjoy the shade of a big tree and avoid a lot of trouble. After returning to the town at the foot of the mountain, Emo Chinga remembered that she no longer had any restorative panaceas, so she casually entered 100 Herbs Hall. Inside 100 Herbs Hall, the front of the counter was still crowded with people. Emo Chinga looked at the layers of people and didn't want to be squeezed with them. She also thought that restorative panaceas weren't anything good, so it would be the same to buy them elsewhere. Thus she prepared to leave. Just as she was about to turn around, she caught a glimpse of the old man who sold her materials and pill recipes that day. He was still sitting in the corner, waving at her. "And he's calling me, right?" Seeing that she stopped, the old man waved his hand even more vigorously. Emo Chinga approached him with doubt. "Are you calling me?" The old man smiled and cupped his hands towards her. "Of course. What did fellow Taoist come to buy today?" Emo Chinga said, "I just wanted to buy some restorative panaceas." The old man looked at her carefully again. "Could it be that you also came to participate in the Immortals' Assembly?" Emo Chinga didn't deny it and asked, "Fellow Taoist, is there something you need?" The old man smiled and said, "It's nothing. It's just that we also met once, so I wanted to greet you since we suddenly met. By the way, if fellow Taoist needs anything else, why don't you tell me? Maybe I can help you." Emo Chinga glanced at him vigilantly. She just came to buy restorative panaceas, which shouldn't be eye-catching at all. Why did this person seem to want to build a relationship with her? The old man was also a shrewd person. Upon seeing her expression, he waved his hand and said, "Fellow Taoist, please don't misunderstand. I just have some news that might be useful to you." "News?" Emo Chinga stared at him in confusion. The old man took out a piece of animal skin from somewhere and handed it to her. He said meaningfully, "Fellow Taoist might be interested." Emo Chinga took the animal skin and saw a line of words written on it, "Hu Clan Stores Sales List." She looked up at the old man in front of her, waiting for his explanation. The old man moved closer to her and said, "Hu Clan is the largest cultivation clan in Tiandao sect. In this town at the foot of the mountain, aside from the several shops belonging to the school, Hu Clan is the most powerful. This sales list is used to deal with the inventory of some top-quality goods." Emo Chinga was confused. Since they're top-quality goods, how did they become inventory? The old man said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist might not know, but there are too many kinds of spiritual plants and objects in this world. Some things are very rare and of top quality, but they might not be wanted for a long time. If a big shop has been open for a long time, it'll accumulate a lot of these top-quality goods. If it wants to sell them, it's not good to directly put them on the counter. Even if it wants to put them on the counter, I'm afraid the counter won't be able to accommodate them. If it doesn't sell, it'll cost the shop a lot of its assets. Therefore, some big shops will clear their inventory every 30 to 50 years and hold a sales list. At that time, all the goods for sale will be displayed for people to choose from. However, the ground will be full of top-quality goods, so those who can attend the sales list aren't ordinary cultivators. They're all carefully selected and reliable people." His last sentence surprised Emo Chinga. "That being the case, why did fellow Taoist tell me?" The old man glanced at her and smiled cunningly. "Because I saw that fellow Taoist is quite wealthy, you're very steady, and your cultivation level is also passable. Presumably you're qualified for this sales list." Emo Chinga raised her eyebrows. "Who are you, fellow Taoist? You can actually decide who qualifies for the sales list?" The old man narrowed his eyes and smiled, looking quite pleased with himself. "Although I'm not a high-level cultivator, I'm a member of Hu Clan. Every cultivator in Hu Clan is qualified to recommend 1 or 2 people to attend the sales list." "I see." It was no wonder this old man's cultivation level was so low, but his work was good. It turned out he had a backer. Seeing that she didn't answer, the old man blinked his mung bean eyes. "Fellow Taoist, don't you want to go? It's very likely you'll find some cheap goods there." Emo Chinga, who was still flipping through the animal skin paper, stared at the old man unhurriedly. "Fellow Taoist, are there any benefits for recommending people?" The old man was stunned. Soon after, he stroked his beard and revealed a somewhat treacherous smile. "Correct. If a customer buys something, the recommender can get a 100th commission. Although it's not much, it's still a reward for your hard work." With a glance, Emo Chinga knew the old man wasn't telling the truth. The benefits were definitely more than what he said. However, she didn't feel like revealing such a trivial matter and continued to slowly flip through the sales list. Seeing her like this, the old man was a bit anxious. He couldn't help but ask, "Fellow Taoist, do you want to go?" Emo Chinga looked through all the goods for sale, then said with a smile, "I'm just going to see the world. It doesn't matter if I don't buy anything, right?" Upon hearing what she said, the old man relaxed and nodded with a smile. "You only need to pay the entrance fee of 2 spirit stones." 2 spirit stones? The old man revealed a somewhat cunning smile. "Fellow Taoist, don't say that you can't afford it. This old man has a good eye for people. Although fellow Taoist doesn't look very rich, you should have a certain amount of wealth. Besides, there are so many top-quality goods. Even if you just want to watch the fun, 2 spirit stones isn't expensive. This old man mingled in the marketplace, so his eyes were indeed sharp. Emo Chenga smiled and nodded. All right, thank you. May I know when the sales list will be held? What's the story? Upon hearing her question, the old man took out a wooden identity tablet and handed it to her. Emo Chenga took it and looked at it. The material was ordinary. One side was engraved with the character, Hu, and the other side was engraved with the number 125. The old man said, "This number is your number. You might get a gift at that time. In addition, you have to have this identity tablet to buy things so you can't lose it. When the sales list is over, Hu clan will naturally take it back." Emo Chenga nodded. The old man continued to say, "The sales list will be held at 7 p.m. tomorrow night. At that time, fellow Taoist can go to the back door of Breeze Pavilion, which isn't far from here. There'll naturally be someone there to meet you. As for the form of the sale, you're free to choose. First come, first served. Fellow Taoist doesn't need to be afraid of conflict with others." Emo Chenga was very satisfied. She raised the animal skin paper in her hand and said, "I'll keep this. Is that okay?" The old man smiled from ear to ear. "Of course. Since fellow Taoist wants to go, I'll naturally give it to you. However, please don't tell others about it." "Of course. Then I'll take my leave first." The old man made a pleased gesture and said, "Please help yourself." Emo Chenga cupped her hands and left the shop. On the way, she lifted the paper in her hand and smiled. Among the goods on the list, there happened to be an item with the words, "Several hundred years old purple Ganoderma," written on it. Chapter 83. Young Master, please come inside. Emo Chenga followed a female cultivator in the first layer of the aura refining realm. They passed through layers of curtains, bypassed one passageway after another, and finally arrived at a hall. This hall was naturally much smaller than the hall of the Market Square Dao conference a few days ago, but it was gorgeous and extravagant. It was really amazing. The floor was paved with jade bricks, the walls were painted with gold powder, tables and chairs made of 100-year-old spiritual wood were placed in the hall, and even the teapot on the table was made of extraordinary jade. There were also gems inlaid everywhere. Even though secular jewelry wasn't worth mentioning to cultivators, it definitely cost a lot to decorate such a hall. Moreover, most of them carried spiritual aura, so they obviously weren't ordinary objects. This Hu clan was indeed worthy of being the #1 clan in the #1 sect. It was so rich and overbearing. Emo Chenga stood at the entrance, dazzled by these furnishings. They were really too gorgeous. "Young master, please record your identity tablet." A voice came from beside her. Emo Chenga turned around and saw a low-level female cultivator standing respectfully on the side. She realized she had lost her composure. Fortunately, this female cultivator didn't show any mocking expression, as if this was a common occurrence. Most cultivators didn't like jewelry, so such a gorgeous scene was very rare. Emo Chenga handed over her identity tablet. The female cultivator took it, wrote down her number, then returned it to her and said with a smile, "Young master, please help yourself. If you like anything, just bring it to the back and pay for it. If you don't understand, you can also ask a maid to introduce you." Emo Chenga frowned slightly but didn't say anything. She just nodded and walked into the hall. She noticed that this female cultivator was the same as the female cultivator who let her in. She didn't call her fellow Taoist but young master, and her attitude was very respectful. Obviously she was a maid, not a cultivator. When she entered the hall, she saw many beautiful female cultivators waiting in the corner, waiting for the guests' orders. They should be the maids mentioned by the female cultivator who recorded the identity tablet. This Hu clan was really generous. There were at least 50 or 60 of these female cultivators, and their cultivation levels ranged from the first layer to the 5th layer. All of them were beautiful, polite, gentle, and submissive. They were actually using their beauty to please the guests. Emo Chenga felt very uncomfortable when she saw some guests strolling around with so-called maids, teasing them. Especially when she thought about how the #1 clan of the #1 sect actually used such methods to entertain guests, it caused her to instantly lose a good impression of the Hu clan. However, it didn't matter whether she had a good impression of him or not. She was here to buy things, not to make friends. Once she got what she wanted, it didn't matter. Looking around, although this underground hall couldn't be compared to the main hall of the market, it wasn't small either. Currently, the hall was filled with over 100 tables, but it still gave off a feeling of spaciousness. These tables were densely packed with all kinds of objects. Most of them were materials, but there were very few spirit tools and elixirs. This was normal, as there was never a lack of people wanting spirit tools and pills. Only materials that were hard to identify or had relatively few uses would become a backlog of goods. It was likely that the spirit tools and pills displayed here were just for show by the Hu clan. At this time there weren't many guests. Most of them were cultivators in the 8th layer of the aura refining realm or above. A small portion of them were foundation building cultivators. There weren't any core formation cultivators. Thinking about it, it made sense. Although this market was selling so-called top-grade items, what cultivators in the core formation realm or above wanted were all natural treasures. How could ordinary top-grade items satisfy them? These cultivators surrounded the tables filled with objects and gossiped about them. Mo Chinga glanced at them, but her line of sight was blocked, so she walked to the wall and asked the female cultivator standing there, "Excuse me, may I ask where the spiritual plants are?" Upon hearing her question, the maid respectfully bowed, then raised her head and said, "I'll take young master there." "No need." Mo Chinga immediately refused. Being served like a young master by a female cultivator was something she couldn't accept. But as soon as she spoke, she realized her tone was stiff, so she added, "I just want to stroll around slowly. I'll go by myself." The female cultivator didn't say anything. She just pointed at something and said in a soft voice, "It's over there." Following the direction, Mo Chinga saw the target. She nodded and said, "Thank you." The female cultivator bowed again. "Please help yourself. If you need anything, please call us." Although her attitude was good, Mo Chinga felt more and more uncomfortable. She already knew that female cultivators generally had low cultivation levels, so their status wasn't high. However, she still couldn't accept that female cultivators were obviously using their looks to serve people. But how could she say anything about other people's behavior? What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. There were a lot of customers at the spiritual plants tables. Mo Chinga was a bit anxious, so she walked directly towards the spiritual plants. She secretly prayed that the purple Ganoderma hadn't been bought yet. In addition, the purple Ganoderma had to be more than 500 years old. Otherwise, she'd rejoice in vain. Spiritual plants were naturally one of the most popular items. Right now, most people were walking around the tables with spiritual plants. As soon as Mo Chinga approached, she saw 5 or 6 people surrounding a table. One of them commented, "Although this 1,000-year-old ginseng is used as medicine in the secular world, its advantage is that it's old. Once it's over 1,000 years old, even an ordinary herb will become a spiritual plant. Besides, since ancient times, ginseng has cultivated into a human. Once it's over 1,000 years old, it's completely comparable to spiritual plants." Another person said, "This star leaf grass isn't bad, but it's a kind of spiritual plant that's hard to find. Some specific pill recipes require it, so although it's not old, it's worth buying. There's also this neither flower nor leaf grass. Everyone knows it's a good thing. Although 100 years isn't long, it's not easy to obtain. However, this kind of spiritual plant is only used for look-preserving pills, so it's not very useful." Mo Chinga pretended to be interested. She leaned closer to listen for a while and found a gap to glance at the table. She didn't see the purple Ganoderma, so she went to the next table. She repeated this process until she finally saw her target at the 7th table. This purple Ganoderma looked like a lump of dark purple stone. It was about the size of a palm and had thick leaves. It was lying quietly in the box. Mo Chinga looked at the description on the box. Purple Ganoderma, 600 years old. Finished product. 500 spirit stones. She then leaned closer and sniffed it. It had a strong and slightly sweet smell, which matched what was written in the book. Seeing that no one was paying attention to her, Mo Chinga calmed herself down. She picked up the box unhurriedly and went to another table. She pretended to browse and chose a 300-year-old stalk of solitary steppe grass. Then she went to the innermost counter. Finally, the person standing behind this counter wasn't a female cultivator, but an old man with a grizzled beard. He wore a neat blue gown and looked very steady. Mo Chinga handed over the 2 jade boxes in her hands. The cultivator took them and opened them. He looked at her with surprise and said, "A 600-year-old purple Ganoderma and a 300-year-old lone steppe grass. The total is 700 spirit stones." Mo Chinga didn't hesitate. She paid the spirit stones, then took the 2 jade boxes and stuffed them into her Chinquan bag. The reason why she paid so readily was because everyone here was relatively rich. 700 spirit stones for a 600-year-old purple Ganoderma and a 300-year-old lone steppe grass was already considered cheap. If she didn't do it readily, people would suspect that she came to this sale fair. Besides, Hu clan was the #1 clan in the #1 cultivation group. 700 spirit stones was only a small business. If she bought 1 or 2 items, other people might not remember. At this moment, Mo Chinga breathed a sigh of relief when the purple Ganoderma was safely stuffed into her Chinkuan bag. She was finally in the mood to stroll around this sale fair. Although she had news about the purple Ganoderma yesterday, she didn't expect things to go so smoothly. She imagined many possible situations she might encounter, but she didn't encounter any of them. She was really too lucky. Without any ulterior motives, Mo Chinga discovered that there were indeed a lot of good things in this sale fair. Many materials she had only seen in books were placed on the tables one by one, making her want to buy them. However, after thinking about it for a while, she felt it was unnecessary to buy them. What was the point of buying things with special purposes if they weren't used to concoct special medicinal pills or spirit tools? If they weren't useful, no matter how good they were, they would still be wasted. However, there were occasionally some lucky people who suddenly saw the materials they wanted to buy. They would go wild with joy, pick them up and rush over to pay the spirit stones. As time passed, the number of people gradually increased. Although the hall was large, it seemed crowded because it was full of tables. Mo Chinga once again chose several materials that might be useful and a large bottle of restorative panaceas. After she finished paying, she wanted to find a quiet place. But when she did, she was startled. Jiang Qingxian. Not far from her, Jiang Qingxian and 2 other youths wearing Tiandao sect's disciple robes were walking together. They were accompanied by several female cultivators. The 3 of them chatted and laughed as they walked, seeming to be very happy. Mo Chinga quickly walked around a table to avoid them, feeling extremely baffled. Has this Jiang Qingxian been going the same way as me? He looks very familiar with these 2 Tiandao sect disciples. Could it be that he's visiting friends? That's unlikely. It would be strange if this young master would travel for more than 20 days just to visit friends. But if he's not visiting friends, why does he seem to be very happy with these 2 people and even come to the sale fair together? Mo Chinga shook her head, unable to figure it out. However, this Jiang Qingxian really isn't a good person. The disciple who traveled with him just died a few days ago, but he actually went to have fun with other friends as if nothing had happened. Of course, she knew it wasn't appropriate to let Jiang Qingxian know about her whereabouts, lest he saw a familiar face and became suspicious. Although young Master Jiang certainly wouldn't notice a small disciple like her, they were from the same sect after all. They often met, so it was normal for him to recognize someone familiar. Thus, Mo Chinga lowered her head and slowly walked through the crowd to the door. Just as she was about to step out, someone stopped her. Young Master, I'm sorry. You can only go out after the sale fair is over. Mo Chinga was dumbfounded. There's such a rule? The female cultivator guarding the door nodded. Yes. Please wait for another 2 hours before you leave. At that time, 2 hours? Mo Chinga really didn't dare to take the risk. However, this was Hu clan's territory, so she definitely couldn't make the decisions herself. The female cultivator observed Mo Chinga's expression and saw she was unwilling, so she said with a smile, Young Master, even if I let you go out, there are foundation-building cultivators from my clan guarding the door, so, if there were, she wouldn't even need to think about going out. Mo Chinga sighed. What if I don't want to see any more? The female cultivator still smiled and said, Then please wait a moment. As she spoke, she waved her hand. Another beautiful female cultivator came over and bowed. The female cultivator guarding the door said, Take this young master to rest. The female cultivator accepted the order and faced Mo Chinga. This young master, please come with me. Chapter 84. The female cultivator led Mo Chinga to the corner of the hall, then pushed open a completely inconspicuous wooden door. Young master, please. Mo Chinga looked around. Compared to the hall, this was a very simple room. There wasn't a single person inside, so she nodded. Thank you. The female cultivator's attitude was still very respectful. She bowed then retreated. When the door closed and she was the only one left in the room, Mo Chinga heaved a sigh of relief. She found a recliner and sat down, wiping her face tiredly. In fact, letting Jiang Qingxian see her wasn't a big deal. From beginning to end, Jiang Qingxian didn't know she saw him snatching the medicinal pills. It was just that she felt guilty and didn't want him to see her, so she didn't want to cause more trouble. She reached into her Qingkuan bag and felt around. The things were still there, so she closed her eyes and sat in meditation to regulate her breathing. 2 hours passed quickly. When she opened her eyes, the female cultivator who brought her here had already opened the door and said respectfully, "Young master, the sales fair is over. You can leave now." Emo Chinga answered, "I know. I'll wait until the crowd disperses a little before I go out." This reason was very normal, so the female cultivator answered, "Yes, please do as you wish." After waiting for about a quarter of an hour, Emo Chinga guessed there probably wasn't anyone left, so she left the room. Sure enough, the only people left in the hall were those female cultivators who were packing up under the direction of several stewards. She glanced around but didn't see Jiang Qingxian, so she swaggered out of Hu Clan's Cool Breeze Pavilion and quietly returned to the small room she rented. Today's matter made her realize the importance of illusory techniques. If it weren't for the fact that her illusory techniques were too weak, she wouldn't have had to hide. However, thinking about today's harvest, Emo Chinga still couldn't hide her excitement. Purple Ganoderma wasn't easy to find, but green ferns were common. When she returned, she just needed to ask the sect to buy them. She should be able to get them very soon. After lying down for a while in a good mood, Emo Chinga suddenly felt a sharp pain in her heart. She frowned and thought for a moment, but her face suddenly turned pale with fright. She took out Second Uncle's natal spirit tablet, which she kept close to her body. Sure enough, the dark red color of the jade tablet faded a little and turned into a pink color. "Second Uncle, it's Second Uncle." With a pale face, Emo Chinga jumped up and put her things away. Without stopping, she opened the door and rushed out of the town. The natal spirit tablet's change in color meant that Second Uncle's injuries were acting up. Second Uncle was indeed comforting her. His situation was clearly not good, but he wanted her to come out and travel. In the end, not even 2 months had passed and, even if she rushed back now, it would take at least 10 days. She did not know if Second Uncle could hold on. Burning with anxiety, Emo Chinga rushed towards Mount Yunwu with all her might. She didn't stop to rest at all. Even when she ran out of spiritual aura, she didn't stop. Instead, she ate restorative panaceas. From time to time, he would pay attention to the natal spirit tablet. Fortunately, it did not fade again. 10 days later, Emo Chinga ran into Second Uncle's small courtyard. "Second Uncle." There was no sound in the room. Emo Chinga rushed forward, but her face immediately turned deathly pale. Second Uncle lay on the bed motionless. She hurried over and felt his pulse. He was still breathing, but his spiritual energy seemed to be very chaotic. She let out a sigh of relief and fed the small revitalizing pill to Second Uncle. She didn't know how long she had been waiting anxiously. Perhaps it was only a short while, or perhaps it was a very long time. Finally, she heard Second Uncle's weak voice. "Second Uncle," she shouted. Yi Jiang opened his eyes and forced a smile. With great difficulty he managed to squeeze out 2 words. "Medicinal pills?" Emo Chinga hastily took out all the small revitalizing pills from her Qingkuan bag. "Second Uncle, is this it?" Yi Jiang nodded. After she fed him all the pills, he sat up and adjusted his breathing with her help. This time, however, it took him a whole day. Day after day, day after day. Finally, Second Uncle's complexion slowly improved and he opened his eyes. Seeing that Second Uncle was no longer in danger, Emo Chinga's nerves, which had been tense for the whole day, slightly relaxed. However, she was still a bit nervous. "Second Uncle, what happened to you?" Yi Jiang shook his head. "I'm fine." Seeing that his complexion was still ashen, Emo Chinga was a bit anxious. "You're already like this and you're still fine? Second Uncle, tell me honestly what happened in the end." Yi Jiang smiled at her to appease her. "I'm really fine." Second Uncle forgot and finished all the small revitalizing pills. "As a result, my injuries relapsed. I didn't have any medicine with me, so I couldn't hold on and had an accident." After he finished speaking, he looked at her with concern. "Xiaotian, did you rush back because of me?" "It's all Second Uncle's fault for being careless and implicating you." Emo Chinga hastily shook her head. "It's okay. I found something outside that'll be very helpful to me in building my foundation, so I was just about to come back." "Second Uncle, are you really okay?" "I said I'm fine, so I'm fine. Don't worry about me." "What did you find?" Emo Chinga carefully examined Second Uncle. Although his breathing was weak, it was much more stable than before, so she reluctantly believed him. She then took out the pill recipe for constitution-enhancing pills and said with a smile, "Second Uncle, look." Yi Jiang took the pill recipe with a skeptical look on his face. After he probed it with his divine sense, his expression suddenly became solemn. After a long time he finally exhaled and said, "So it's constitution-enhancing pills. Where did you get them?" Emo Chenga was surprised. "Second uncle, you know about them?" A nostalgic expression appeared on Yi Jiang's face. 200 years ago, this constitution-enhancing pill set off a reign of terror. There's no cultivator over 200 years old who doesn't know about them. A reign of terror? Yi Jiang slowly nodded. He seemed to be recalling something. At that time, second uncle was still an aura-refining cultivator, your father was still in the middle stage of the foundation-building realm, and there was also a core formation ancestor in our family who hadn't passed away yet. This constitution-enhancing pill appeared in an ancient place, but it set off a storm that affected most nascent soul and core formation cultivators in the celestial pole. At first, it was discovered by core formation cultivators, so they fought over it incessantly. Later on, many nascent soul cultivators also fought over it. Our core formation ancestor was injured and died early because of this. But in the end, the pill recipe was lost. We don't know who got it. Where did you get it? Emo Chenga said, "It was an individual aura-refining cultivator. I also happened to meet him by accident." She then recounted what happened that night. After she finished, Yi Jiang remained silent for a long time. He thought for a long time but still couldn't figure it out. He finally said, "Maybe this person is just lucky. This is also a kind of fated chance." After he finished speaking, he looked at Emo Chenga and said with a smile, "Little Tian, this thing's value is hard to estimate. It seems the heavens are helping you." Emo Chenga was also very happy to see second uncle so happy. "Also, I happened to buy a 600-year-old purple Ganoderma at the auction. I'm really lucky." "Oh? That's rare." 600-year-old purple Ganoderma is very rare. "Yes, if it wasn't a coincidence, I don't know how long it would have taken me to buy it. Right, second uncle, I've been thinking about it and I think it's better for me to learn how to concoct pills by myself. What do you think?" Yi Jiang nodded slightly. "Of course." He then praised her, "You're becoming more and more steady in your actions." Second uncle is relieved. "But it seems I really don't have any talent in concocting pills. I've refined more than 100 sets of materials for low-level medicinal pills, but only 6 pills were successfully concocted." Yi Jiang couldn't help but laugh. "This is normal. You don't have to look down on yourself. Most concoctions masters are like this at the beginning. Talent? Talented people are always in the minority, but only those who persevere are masters. Take your time. You're still young, you have more than 100 years to squander." "I understand, second uncle." After hesitating for a moment, Emo Chenga asked again, "Second uncle, your injuries?" Seeing that he couldn't hide it from her, Yi Jiang finally sighed and said, "All right, second uncle will tell you the truth. My condition is indeed not good. Before you came back, second uncle was unconscious for too long, so my injuries were even more serious. Since you've come back, you should accompany second uncle in these last moments." Chapter 85. While making tea, Emo Chenga leaned against the table in a daze. When she came back that day, the meaning of second uncle's words was already very clear. These days she was absent-minded and kept thinking about this matter. That day, second uncle had said that she still had 100 years to squander. Second uncle, who had always been forcing her to cultivate, had actually said those words to her. It was clear to see how bad the situation was. Second uncle had basically treated her as a dead person. Now she no longer asked herself what she would do if second uncle died. Seeing second uncle's calm expression, she made up her mind to let second uncle, who had been worrying about her for 10 years, leave in peace. But, thinking about this result still made her sad. The tea leaves in the pot unfolded, and the tea gradually turned light green. Emo Chenga calmed herself down, poured a cup of tea and handed it to second uncle. "Second uncle, drink some tea." She added some mind-calming spiritual herbs to the tea, hoping second uncle would feel better after drinking it. Yi Jiang was even older now. In fact, even if a cultivator's lifespan was nearing its end, they would still be able to maintain their youthful appearance. They would not wither like mortals. The reason why he was like this was because he was injured. After drinking the tea, he seemed to be a little more spirited and asked, "Xiaodan, last time you said the spiritual aura in your body changed?" Emo Chenga nodded. "Yes, it became very strange. A trace of very cold spiritual aura gradually appeared in my dantian, and it also swallowed other spiritual auras and transformed them into this kind of spiritual aura. I didn't know the reason, so I didn't dare to continue cultivating." Yi Jiang thought for a while then said slowly, "It doesn't matter. You should continue cultivating. Second uncle once heard that when female cultivators practiced certain cultivation techniques, their spiritual aura would change. Presumably it was because the cultivation technique leaned toward yin. Your situation should be because of the special nature of the cultivation technique you practice. In the past, your cultivation level wasn't high enough, so you couldn't transform it into pure yin spiritual aura. Now that you've reached the peak stage of the aura refining realm and your cultivation level is gradually increasing, the spiritual aura in your body changed. This change must be the preparation your dantian made for building your foundation. Since that's the case, you should continue cultivating and wait until your spiritual aura completely changes before building your foundation. This answer made Mo Chinga happy. Does that mean I'll have a better chance of building my foundation? Yi Jiang nodded. That should be the case. He thought for a while then said, otherwise you should go back to the sect. Of course, don't ask anyone, just go to the sect's ancient records collection to check. Okay, got it. How about, you go now? Second uncle isn't feeling unwell right now. Go or else you won't be able to get away. Mo Chinga understood the meaning behind his words. Second uncle was worried that her injuries would worsen, so he didn't dare to refuse. She said, all right. Second uncle, be careful. Half an hour later, Mo Chinga returned to Yunwu sect. First, he went to the steward's hall to inform them that he had returned. Then he returned to his residence. Everything was the same as before she left. Jiang Shanghong was cultivating in his room, while Qin Shi and Louis Dao were still in closed-door meditation, and Louis Dao had reportedly entered his closed-door meditation immortal's cave. Oh, there's one more thing. Senior Martial Brother Zhou has succeeded in building his foundation and has become Martial Uncle Zhou. Mo Chinga was very happy for him upon hearing this news. Although Martial Uncle Zhou was cold at the beginning, he was actually a good person. If the disciples living in this courtyard had any questions, he would answer them with all his heart. Moreover, it was thanks to Martial Uncle Zhou's care that she could live so comfortably here. During the 2 years she was in closed-door meditation, she didn't do anything, and it was Martial Uncle Zhou who deliberately put in a good word for her in the steward's hall. Because of this, Mo Chinga pondered whether she should congratulate Martial Uncle Zhou or not. In the end, she decided to ask someone to deliver a message and prepare to go after the matter was settled. After all, Martial Uncle Zhou lived in the North Peak now, so it wasn't convenient for her to go there. Just as she was about to go to 10,000 Laws Pavilion, a voice came from outside. Junior Martial Brother Yi, is Junior Martial Brother Yi Xiaotian in? Mo Chinga opened the door to her room and saw a male disciple she didn't know standing outside the small hall. Senior Martial Brother, what's the matter? Upon seeing her, the man smiled and said, You're Junior Martial Brother Yi? Mo Chinga nodded. Yes. The man sized her up from head to toe. His gaze made her feel very uncomfortable. Then he said, It was Martial Uncle Zhou who told me to come. He heard you came back so he wanted to see you. Mo Chinga said, I just asked this senior Martial Brother from the North Peak to deliver a message, and he arrived already? The man was stunned. I don't know. It's just that. Martial Uncle Zhou told me to deliver a message. I see. Thank you, Senior Martial Brother. I'll go now. The man said, I'll take you there. Presumably you also don't know where Martial Uncle Zhou is. This man was really kind, so Mo Chinga said, Thank you, Senior Martial Brother. You're welcome. Let's go. After leaving her room, Mo Chinga asked, May I know Senior Martial Brother's surname? The man left in a hurry and answered without looking back, My surname is Wu. Oh, so it's Senior Martial Brother Wu. Senior Martial Brother, are you an elite disciple of the North Peak? This question made Senior Martial Brother Wu proud for a moment. His footsteps also slowed down a bit. Yes, my master's name is Qingyu. You should know him. Ah, so you're Martial Uncle Qingyu's brilliant disciple. It's an honor to meet you. Mo Chinga politely greeted him. This Senior Martial Brother Wu immediately raised his chin proudly, causing her to snicker. In fact, the reason she said it was an honor to meet him was because since this Senior Martial Brother Wu was a foundation-building Martial Uncle's disciple, he should be an elite disciple with a profound cultivation level. However, he looked like he was in his 30s, yet his cultivation level was only in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm. Nevertheless, it wasn't strange. This Senior Martial Brother Wu only had a cultivation level in the 7th layer, but he still called her Junior Martial Brother. Obviously he had something to rely on. Of course she wouldn't say this out loud. Judging from this Senior Martial Brother Wu's reaction just now, He was someone who cared a lot about his reputation. If she said something to him and it reached his ears, he would definitely turn hostile immediately. After walking for a while, Mo Chenga asked curiously, "Senior Marshal Brother Wu, which road is this? Does it lead to Tongbei Peak?" This Senior Marshal Brother Wu walked very fast without looking back. "Marshal Uncle Zhou just came to the South Peak to take care of business. Quickly follow me." Mo Chenga frowned and followed him for a while. Seeing that the road was becoming more and more desolate, she immediately stopped and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Wu." Senior Marshal Brother Wu didn't answer her. After walking a few steps and realizing that she wasn't following him, he finally turned his head and said unhappily, "What are you doing?" Mo Chenga swept her gaze over her surroundings and stared at him vigilantly. "Where in the world does Senior Marshal Brother Wu want to take me?" Upon hearing her question, Senior Marshal Brother Wu's eyes suddenly flickered. He stammered, "And nothing?" Judging from his expression, it would be strange if Mo Chenga believed him. She immediately took out her spirit tool to be on guard and said coldly, "Senior Marshal Brother Wu, do you think I'm a fool? If we go down this road, we'll reach a cliff at the end. Do you think Marshal Uncle Zhou will meet me at the cliff?" Seeing that his purpose was seen through, this person cast a glance to the side, then clenched his teeth and said loudly, "Junior Marshal Brother, it's too late to leave now." Mo Chenga smiled contemptuously. "Senior Marshal Brother Wu, do you think you can stop me?" This person obviously didn't expect that she would turn hostile and actually not take him seriously at all. He immediately stammered, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, we can talk about this." Mo Chenga was surprised to see his reaction. This person was an elite disciple, so how could he be so spineless? But she clearly knew there was a problem, so how could she continue following him? Besides, this person was an elite disciple after all, so it wouldn't be good for her to attack him. She immediately turned around and walked away without saying anything. "Junior Marshal Brother Yi." She didn't even respond. Soon after, she felt a spiritual aura fluctuation behind her. Mo Chenga reacted very quickly and dodged, but she immediately broke out in a cold sweat. What was attacking her was actually a high-level blue sea freezing ice talisman. If she was hit just now, she would probably be frozen on the spot and be trampled on. What does this Senior Marshal Brother Wu want to do? Seeing that she was glaring at him fiercely, Senior Marshal Brother Wu first looked scared, then angry. Finally, he took out another talisman. High-level talismans weren't cheap, and they were also very powerful. Even ordinary talismans weren't easy to deal with if there were many of them. In the previous fights of magical power, Mo Chenga always tried her best to avoid directly facing the opponent's talismans. Usually, the outcome of the fight would be decided before the opponent's talismans were used. But now, because she didn't want to fight, Senior Marshal Brother Wu took the initiative. "Senior Marshal Brother Wu," she asked coldly, "what's your objective? I don't think I've offended you, have I?" At that moment, a very slippery voice answered, "You haven't offended him. The one you've offended is me." Mo Chenga turned her head to look and was shocked. Not far from her, a person was walking down the path leading to the valley. It was Jiang Qingxian. Her expression changed and her mind raced. The first thing she thought of was that she picked up the pill recipe for the constitution-enhancing pill that he accidentally missed. However, she was also puzzled as to how he discovered it. Soon after she thought about it, Jiang Qingxian was hiding here, but she didn't sense him at all even when he approached her. He must have used a breath-concealing technique, which meant he must have long been prepared to deal with her. But if she killed Jiang Qingxian, would she still have a foothold in Mount Yunwu? That Mount Yunwu's master would most likely eat her alive and cook her alive. That's not right. If he was a core formation cultivator from Jiang clan, would he need to deal with her like this? She was only a small aura refining cultivator. To a core formation cultivator, she was nothing more than an ant that could be pinched to death. However, the current situation didn't allow her to think too much. She reached into her Chengkuan bag and several formation discs and flags flew out. Jiang Qingxian snorted contemptuously, then angrily said to Senior Marshal Brother Wu, "Really useless. You can't do anything at all. Go stand guard." In front of Jiang Qingxian, Senior Marshal Brother Wu immediately lowered his head and bowed. "Yes, Senior Marshal Brother Jiang." Mo Chenga couldn't help but snort. So this Senior Marshal Brother Wu was Jiang Qingxian's little follower. No wonder he was so spineless. Once Senior Marshal Brother Wu walked far away, Jiang Qingxian turned around to size up the 5 elements life and death formation she laid temporarily. A mocking expression appeared on his face. "Using formations to deal with me? Mo Chenga suddenly remembered that Jiang Qingxian had a heaven-breaking mirror in his hand. It was precisely a magic weapon that could restrain formations. At this time Jiang Qingxian indeed took out that mirror. A blue light shot out from the mirror and shone on her formation disc. With a loud boom, the formation disc immediately exploded. This formation was modified to be suitable for temporary formations, but its power was still somewhat lacking. Mo Chenga's expression changed, but she soon calmed down and sneered. So what if I don't use formations? What do I have to fear? You? Jiang Qingxian naturally knew she was mocking him for not being skilled in Taoist techniques, so he immediately shouted angrily. Mo Chenga stared at him and asked in a heavy voice, "May I know how I offended Senior Marshal Brother Jiang? Why did Senior Marshal Brother Jiang set such a trap to deal with me?" Upon hearing her question, Jiang Qingxian burst into laughter. After laughing for a long time he finally said mockingly, "Even if I didn't believe you were the one who followed me and took away the pill recipe for constitution-enhancing pill, judging from your reaction I believe it. Do you still think I don't know?" Mo Chenga originally didn't believe in luck. She just thought she would confess without being pressed if Jiang Qingxian didn't do it because of this matter, so she asked again. Now that she knew it was because of this matter, she wasn't disappointed. She already knew she had a slim chance of survival, so she calmed down and stopped thinking about other things. She asked, "Then how did Senior Marshal Brother Jiang know?" You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.